Imagine this. You wake up not to the soft chime of an alarm clock, not to the gentle hum of a city stirring to life, but to the sharp crow of a rooster echoing across a mist-covered field. Your bed isn't covered in crisp linen sheets or a plush duvet. Instead, it's a straw-stuffed mattress that scratches your skin and leaves small, itchy reminders of the night. The morning air seeps into your bones, carrying with it the earthy scent of damp wood, livestock, and the silent breath of a village that has yet to rise. Welcome to the daily rhythm of a medieval peasant, a life less sung about, rarely romanticized, and almost always overshadowed by tales of knights, castles, and courtly intrigues. Tonight, I invite you to step gently into the forgotten pathways of thatched roofs and muddy lanes. This isn't the story of kings or queens. It's the quiet heartbeat of those who truly kept the medieval world alive. Hello, and welcome back to our channel, the place where we unravel what it was really like to live in worlds long vanished. I'm so glad you're here, perhaps winding down after a long day, or searching for a soothing escape before drifting off to sleep. Wherever you are, take a deep breath. Let the modern world fade away for a moment. Tonight, we're traveling far beyond the stone walls of any castle, beyond the echo of church bells, into the humble, tender, and often harsh world of medieval peasants. Picture yourself opening your eyes to a low wooden ceiling above. The faint gray light filters through a small opening or a thin linen curtain acting as a makeshift window. You hear the soft rustle of your family waking around you. Parents, siblings, perhaps even an elderly grandparent, all sharing the same single-room dwelling. There's no privacy, no separate chambers. Life here is communal in the most intimate sense. Every cough, every whisper, every sigh blends into a tapestry of shared survival. Outside, the village starts to stir. Thin spirals of smoke begin to rise as fires are kindled to prepare the simplest of breakfasts. A thin gruel or coarse bread, maybe a handful of dried peas or last season's turnips if fortune allows. There's no sweet aroma of coffee, no clink of porcelain cups, only the rough clatter of wooden bowls and the patient labor of calloused hands. Before the sun properly lifts above the horizon, your tasks await you. Life for a medieval peasant wasn't a cycle of leisure and spontaneous adventure. It was a precise choreography of necessity. Each day followed the slow, unyielding beat of survival, tending to fields, caring for animals, mending tools, gathering firewood. These tasks, repeated endlessly, formed a silent prayer to the gods of the harvest and the mercy of the seasons. Perhaps your feet are already sore from yesterday's labor, the skin cracked from cold mornings and endless mud. Your fingers bear the stories of small cuts, the faint burns from the hearth, the ache of carrying bundles too heavy for your narrow shoulders. Yet as you step outside, there's a soft dignity in the way you greet your neighbor, exchange a quiet nod, share a moment of warmth before the day's demands scatter you across the fields and commons. In the background, you might hear the distant toll of the church bell, not as an invitation to prayer, but as a reminder of the rhythm that governs every aspect of your life. The church isn't just a spiritual center. It is the guardian of time, of order, of community bonds. It watches over baptisms, weddings, funerals, the entire arc of existence wrapped under its shadow. But it also demands tithes, labor, and unwavering devotion. Your body might belong to the fields, but your soul, you are reminded, belongs elsewhere. As we journey deeper tonight, you'll all learn that life for a medieval peasant was shaped not only by hardship, but by a certain quiet resilience. There were moments of song and laughter, of shared meals and seasonal festivals, brief flickers of joy lighting up the gray tapestry of toil. Children ran barefoot through village lanes. Mothers whispered old lullabies over cradles carved from oak, and elders passed on stories by the fire, their words weaving a fragile shield against the cold winds outside. Imagine holding in your hands a small wooden spoon, perhaps the only one your family owns. Each scratch on its surface marks a meal, a moment of warmth. Imagine the smell of freshly baked rye bread on a festival day, the rare sweetness of honey melting on your tongue, a gift from a neighbor's hive shared in a moment of celebration. These glimpses of comfort, though fleeting, stitch together the spirit of a community constantly under siege by famine, taxes, and disease. But this story isn't about pity. It's about perspective. It's about seeing beyond the mud-caked hems and rough hands to witness the quiet poetry in each mundane moment. The way a mother's eyes softened as she watched her children sleep. The pride a father felt when a calf stood on wobbly legs for the first time. The communal sigh of relief when the harvest was safely stored and winter's claws seemed a little less sharp for one more year. In these villages, life pulsed in cycles that mirrored the seasons: growth, hardship, harvest, and rest. And though their names might never appear in illuminated manuscripts or royal chronicles, their lives carved the true backbone of medieval society. Without them, no castle could stand tall, no king could raise an army, no church could collect tithes. They were, in every quiet sense, the foundation beneath the crown. Tonight, as you listen, I invite you to walk barefoot beside these men and women, to feel the mud between your toes, the weight of a wooden bucket against your palm, the fleeting warmth of a shared laugh around a smoky hearth. Let the modern world fade into a gentle hush, and imagine the stars above a thatched roof, the slow crackle of a fire as the village drifts into the dark embrace of night. So settle in, perhaps with a blanket tucked around your shoulders, a warm drink by your side. Together, we'll slip back through the centuries and explore the hidden corners of a life so far removed from ours, yet so deeply human in its small joys and daily struggles. This is not just a history lesson. It's an invitation to breathe with them, to stand beside them, to understand the uncelebrated poetry of medieval peasant life. Are you ready? Let's begin. Imagine stepping out of your small timber-framed home just as the first blush of dawn stains the sky. The air is cold enough to bite at your fingers. It carries a kind of silent promise that today, like all days before, you will rise and move in tandem with the pulse of the earth. You hear the shuffling of feet on frozen dirt paths, the low murmur of animals stirring in wooden pens, the hushed whispers of neighbors greeting the day with heavy eyelids and heavier hearts. In a medieval peasant village, each day was an echo of the last, a soft refrain repeated endlessly in the hope of survival. There were no calendars pinned to the wall, no printed schedules to follow. Instead, your guide was the sun, the shape of the moon, and the slow transformation of fields around you. These subtle cues, often overlooked by modern eyes, were vital markers of time, telling you when to plant, when to reap, when to gather wood before the snows arrived. The day began before the sun truly rose, usually by the feeble light of a clay oil lamp or the embers still glowing from the hearth. You might find yourself gently coaxing a fire to life, the smoke curling up and catching in your throat, your eyes stinging but accustomed. The hearth wasn't simply for warmth. It was the heart of the home, the place where meals, stories, and prayers converged. A few embers meant breakfast, a thin, grayish porridge of oats or barley, stirred slowly with a wooden spoon worn smooth from generations of use. The bread you might eat was heavy, coarse, and dark, its crust often tough enough to test your teeth. But it was cherished, a symbol of labor transformed into sustenance. Each loaf bore the imprint of hands that kneaded dough before sunrise, hands that might also mend fishing nets, sew rough tunics, or cradle a feverish child late at night. There was no abundance, no surplus to waste. Every crumb was a victory, every shared meal a silent act of defiance against hunger. Children, if they were old enough to walk steadily, joined in the morning chores. You might see a small boy struggling to carry a bundle of twigs twice his size, his breath misting in the air. A young girl carefully balancing a pail of water fetched from a communal well, her small steps deliberate to avoid spilling even a precious drop. These acts were not burdens in their eyes, but rites of passage, small proofs that they were part of the community's larger tapestry of effort and endurance. As daylight strengthened, the men and older boys would drift toward the fields, tools resting across shoulders, wooden plows, simple hoes, hand-forged sickles. Women might remain closer to home, weaving, spinning, tending gardens, or minding livestock. Yet, in times of planting or harvest, everyone took to the fields. The soil was a demanding master, unrelenting and immune to excuses. A missed day meant thinner gruel in winter, fewer seeds to barter, perhaps an empty belly in the coldest months. While they worked, they sang, not to entertain but to synchronize labor, to measure out rows and furrows, to weave a kind of collective heartbeat into the landscape. These songs drifted up like morning mist, half prayer, half reminder of the thin line separating survival from loss. Lyrics spoke of seasons, of saints, of ancestors long gone. Even as hands blistered and backs bent under the weight of earth and expectation, voices rose, finding unity in hardship. Between the plowing and the sowing, there were moments of pause, small, easily overlooked fragments of humanity that carried a gentle weight. A woman might pause to braid her daughter's hair under the shade of a gnarled tree, her fingers deft despite the calluses. An elder might lean against a fence post, tracing memories into the dust with the tip of a cane, eyes clouded yet bright when watching young children chase chickens through the yard. Such scenes were threads of warmth woven through the coarsest fabric of existence. In the afternoons, you might witness the village common bustling quietly. The blacksmith, his apron stained and forehead shining, hammering at a horseshoe or mending a cracked plow blade. The weaver, her loom creaking softly as colorful threads gathered into rough cloth, destined for winter cloaks or market barter. The baker, face dusted in flour, slipping heavy loaves into a communal oven, the warmth offering brief refuge from the chill outside. Children's laughter punctuated these hours like bright notes in a somber melody. Their games were simple. Hoops rolled along the ground, small dolls carved from scraps of wood, knots of string twisted into imaginary creatures. There were no bright toys from distant cities, no jingling amusements. Yet in their eyes, a hoop could become a dragon, a doll a queen, a string not a portal to other worlds. Even here, imagination sparked like fireflies at dusk, dancing in fleeting moments of joy. As the day waned, the golden light of sunset cast long shadows, painting the village in gentle hues of amber and violet. Families returned home slowly, steps heavy yet unhurried. There was no rush to beat traffic or attend meetings. Their urgency was simpler, more primal, to return before darkness fell completely, to gather by the hearth where warmth and togetherness offered the only true sanctuary. Inside, the evening meal was meager, perhaps a thin broth flavored by whatever herbs remained from the last foraging, paired with the ever-present bread. On festival days or after a successful hunt, there might be meat, a rare and sacred addition. Such meals were celebrated not just for their taste, but for the fleeting relief they offered from the drudgery of routine hunger. Afterward, the family gathered close, sometimes sharing news from neighboring villages or rumors carried by wandering merchants and minstrels. Then came the moments of quiet reflection. An old story might be told, its words looping in gentle cadences, drawing everyone closer into the comforting circle of shared memory. Someone might hum a low melody, a lullaby from a grandmother now gone, the notes curling upward to mingle with the drifting smoke. In these soft, shadowy hours, life felt less harsh, the day's wounds seemed to close, and tomorrow's burdens waited silently outside the door. As sleep approached, each person retreated to a corner of the single room, spreading straw bedding across the hard floor. There were no bedrooms, no privacy, only the collective warmth of bodies gathered against the cold night. In the dimness, You might hear the creak of beams overhead, the restless shifting of a child, the distant howl of a wolf beyond the village fence. But in that darkness, there was also safety, an unspoken agreement to watch over each other, to share warmth and breath, to hold the fragile thread of life together for one more dawn. And when at last eyelids grew heavy, and the rough scent of hay and smoke filled your dreams, you would drift into a sleep deeper than any city slumber. A sleep shaped by exhaustion and simple gratitude. Gratitude for surviving another day, for the softness of a mother's whispered prayer, for the knowledge that no matter how meager, tomorrow's sun would rise again. As dawn becomes a memory and daylight spreads fully across the fields, the village shifts into its midday rhythm. This is not a place of clocks and strict hours. Rather, it's a place where the movement of shadows, the smell of rising bread, and the subtle song of birds dictate the flow of time. In this moment, life seems to hum with a quiet, almost sacred vibration, the same pulse that guided ancestors long before you, and that will guide those who come after. After the morning's most urgent tasks, a kind of collective breath spreads through the village. Workers pause to drink thin ale, safer than water, which is often teeming with hidden threats. The ale is weak and slightly sour, but it is enough to wet the lips and soothe cracked throats. Perhaps a bit of hard cheese, a handful of dried peas, or a bruised apple accompanies this break. Each bite is a small triumph, a victory against the persistent hunger that lurks just beyond the edge of every season. In these moments of pause, old hands rest on knees darkened by sun and soil. Fingers, stiff with arthritis and habit, trace invisible patterns across worn tunics. They speak without words. These hands, telling stories of lost harvests, of children buried too soon, of quiet joys found in a newborn calf or a surprise patch of wild berries. You might see an elder turn his face to the sky, eyes closed, as if listening for something just beyond hearing. Perhaps he's recalling the echo of a lover's laugh decades gone, or the memory of a sibling who once worked beside him, laughter swallowed now by the silent ground. Nearby, a young mother rocks a fussy child on her hip, her other hand expertly braiding onions to hang for drying. Her motions are so practiced, they look almost like a dance, each twist and loop performed with the grace of countless repetitions. At her feet, toddlers totter across the dusty yard, their games interrupted only by the occasional shriek of surprise or delight. Their laughter sounds out of place against the hush of the fields, like a sudden burst of color on a gray canvas. The midday meal is small and swift, sometimes taken standing, as the press of work allows little luxury for leisure. Bread dipped in broth, perhaps a few salted fish if fortune has been kind. Yet in the simplicity of these meals lies a kind of ritual comfort. Each crumb is precious, each swallow a reminder of the delicate balance that holds life steady on its narrow beam. In the small spaces between labor, you might hear soft murmurs of prayer. Not always formal words recited from rote memory, but whispered phrases that slip from cracked lips to the sky. Requests for rain, for a healthy lamb, for a child's fever to break. These quiet appeals are as constant as the churning of the sun, as reliable as the ache in weary joints. The physical work resumes almost as a trance. Tools return to hands, calluses pressing into wooden shafts worn smooth by generations. The body bends and rises, a motion so old it feels like breathing. Shoulders tighten under rough homespun shirts. Backs glisten in the sun despite the chill in the air. The sound of tools striking earth is a language all its own, a song of survival, of bargain, of endless exchange between human and land. The women's work is no less vital, though often hidden in corners and doorways. The spinning wheel hums with a soft, rhythmic whir, turning tufts of raw wool into usable thread. A loom creaks in a darkened room, each shuttle pass punctuated by a subtle exhalation of effort. Outside, linen is laid across hedges to bleach under the pale sun, flapping gently in the breeze like spectral visitors. Herbs hang from rafters in bunches: sage, thyme, rosemary, their fragrances weaving a tapestry of invisible protection against unseen ills. Life for the medieval peasant is an unbroken line of seasons, stitched together by small victories and constant vigilance. You learn to read the wind, to understand the whispers of migrating birds, to judge the depth of the snow by the sound of your own breath in the early morning dark. Each season carries its own demands and silent threats. The spring's hunger gap, the summer's fierce sun, the autumn's frantic harvesting before frost, and the winter's long, unblinking stare. In these cycles, you find both despair and comfort. There is no illusion of escape. The fields will always call, the animals will always need, the hearth will always wait to be fed. Yet there is an intimacy here too, a quiet understanding that you are woven into a much larger pattern, a fabric that stretches beyond any single life. As the sun tilts westward, shadows lengthen and a chill begins its slow descent. You might hear a low call echo across the fields, a shepherd's whistle, the clatter of a cart returning from distant pastures, the bark of a dog gathering stray sheep. Slowly, villagers make their way home, each step heavy but steady. There is a shared resignation in this march, but also a shared relief. Another day's labor survived, another twilight granted. In the soft glow of late afternoon, small communal tasks unfold. A neighbor might come by to borrow a bit of lard, a young girl sent to fetch ashes for soap making. These exchanges are more than mere transactions. They are the thin, vital threads that bind the community together. In a world with no insurance policies or social safety nets, relationships are currency, kindness a lifeline stronger than any iron lock. Inside each home, the hearth flames flicker to life again. Children, smudged with dirt and grass stains, curl close to the warmth. A father might mend a broken fence rail by lamplight, each strike of the hammer echoing softly against thick walls. A mother hums an old ballad as she patches a torn tunic, the melody drifting out into the night like a gentle benediction. When night finally arrives, it does so with quiet authority. The world outside vanishes into a pool of shadows, the only illumination, a scattering of stars and the thin glow from cottage windows. In that darkness, the air feels almost alive, carrying the scent of earth, smoke, and something older, the collective sigh of countless lives that have come before, all repeating this same dance. Before sleep, there may be one last moment of gathering. Perhaps a story shared in low tones, a tale of a saint who performed miracles, or a mischievous spirit said to hide in the hedgerows. These stories are not just entertainment. They are woven shields against the unknown, quiet incantations to keep fear at bay. Children drift to sleep with these words, still swirling in their heads, their dreams filled with imagined quests and mysterious forests. As you lay down on your bed of straw and coarse blankets, you feel each bone and muscle complain, yet there is a kind of deep, elemental satisfaction that hums beneath the pain. You have done what you must. You have bent to the will of the seasons and emerged, for now, unbroken. You have listened to the rhythm of the land and responded in kind. And as your breath slows and the weight of exhaustion pulls you under, you understand, in the marrow of your bones, that survival is not a single act, but 1,000 small obediences to a world that asks so much and promises so little. And so, as sleep closes around you like a thick cloak, you drift quietly into the arms of a night as ancient as the stones beneath your feet, carrying you forward to another dawn, another repetition of the soft, ceaseless hymn of survival. The sun rises once more, as it always does, indifferent to the aches and fears of those below. You stir from your straw bedding, feeling each joint announce itself in low, protesting creaks. The air inside your small cottage is sharp and damp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and earth. For a moment, you listen. The muffled snore of a sibling, the distant murmur of animals stirring in the byre. This is the quietest the day will ever be, the fragile hush before the grind resumes. You reach for your clothes, rough wool and linen, often patched and repatched until the original fabric feels like a memory. They are cold against your skin, but you pull them close, knowing they are your first shield against the indifferent chill. As your fingers fumble at laces and ties, you hear the faint tap of rain against the thatch above, a reminder that even the weather commands its own tyranny. Breakfast is a simple affair, if it can even be called that. A crust of bread softened in thin ale, perhaps a smear of animal fat if luck has favored you lately. There is no ceremony, no leisurely sipping of warm drinks, no morning paper or moment to stretch. You eat to live, each bite a small truce with the hunger that crouches just beyond the door. The tasks of the day await without sympathy. You step outside into a world slick with mud, the pathways glistening under the half-hearted light. The fields, your constant adversary and companion, stretch before you like a damp, endless promise. Each furrow, each weed, each stubborn stone reminds you that the land is not yours to command. You are merely tolerated, a guest granted passage, so long as you bend your back low enough. You might spend hours stooped, breaking clods of earth, or wading through waterlogged soil to repair a dike or clear a drainage channel. Your fingers, cracked and swollen, fumble around small seeds, each one carrying the fragile hope of sustenance months down the line. Each planting is a gamble, a whispered bargain with seasons that care nothing for your needs. Nearby, you hear others engaged in their own quiet battles. The rhythmic scrape of a hoe, the sharp thud of a wooden mallet as fence posts are set, the low chant of women washing clothes at the stream, their hands raw and red from icy water. This chant is not a song of joy, but a form of survival, a pattern of sound that allows the mind to slip away, even if just for a few heartbeats. The village itself is a living organism, each resident a cell performing its tiny, vital duty. You notice the old woman hobbling from house to house with a basket of herbs and charms. Some say she's a healer, others whisper of witchcraft. But her presence is accepted, even welcomed. In a world with no reliable medicine, her dried roots and whispered blessings are as close to comfort as many will ever know. You cross paths with the tanner, his clothes perpetually stained, his hands carrying the lingering sharp tang of hides and lye. His eyes, narrowed from long years of squinting against sun and smoke, flick toward you in greeting, but words are unnecessary. In this small community, gestures speak louder than speech. A nod, a lifted hand, a brief meeting of eyes that says, "I see you." We endure together. Midday brings no reprieve. You pause, standing in the field, back bent and breath ragged, to gnaw on a hunk of bread gone nearly rock hard. Perhaps you chew on a few wild greens gathered along the path, nettles or sorrel, anything to trick the stomach into quiet. The sun, if it emerges at all, offers no warmth, only a pale reminder of better days you've never truly known. The smell of smoke drifts from the village hearths, mingling with the scent of damp earth and manure. You close your eyes for a moment, allowing your mind to wander beyond the drudgery. Maybe you imagine the faraway towns you've heard of from passing peddlers, places where people supposedly wear soft shoes and dine on meats every night. Maybe you imagine distant lands beyond the sea, though you've never glimpsed such expanses except in half-remembered stories. But imagination is a dangerous indulgence for a peasant. Dreams do not mend shoes or sharpen scythes. They do not patch thatched roofs or soothe colicky infants. So you let them fade, pushed aside like a stray chicken from a doorway, and return to your work with resigned determination. Children, too, play their own part in this quiet dance of survival. By the age of 5 or 6, they learn to gather eggs, collect firewood, or watch over the smallest siblings. Their laughter, when it erupts, feels like a bird's sudden flight, startling, fleeting, and precious. Yet even in play, they mimic the motions of their parents. dragging small bundles of sticks, pretending to knead imaginary dough, practicing the swing of a wooden hoe in the dust. Childhood here is not a separate kingdom, but merely the beginning of an endless apprenticeship in labor. As you work, you become attuned to the smallest signals around you, the shift in a donkey's bray that might mean a loose fence, the flick of a bird's wings heralding a change in weather, the distant murmur of voices indicating a new worry or a shared sorrow. Each sense becomes sharpened not for art or leisure, but for vigilance, for the constant necessity of knowing what might go wrong next. Evenings bring a subtle, collective sigh. The weight of exhaustion folds around your shoulders like a rough wool cloak. Tools are cleaned, not because they must shine, but because a broken tool tomorrow could mean a lost week's work. You trade brief words with neighbors, often about practicalities, a sick cow, a missing chicken, a new crack in the well law. And yet, beneath these mundane exchanges, an unspoken current of kinship runs deep. You sit close, knees nearly touching the flames, feeling warmth seep into bone-deep aches. The meal is meager, often a thin pottage of root vegetables, thickened with scraps of bread. Once in a while, a sliver of salted pork might be dropped in as a rare luxury. The children stare into the pot with wide, solemn eyes, as if witnessing a ceremony. You eat slowly, not from choice, but because stretching each bite is a practiced ritual of survival. Afterward, silence descends like a gentle fog. Someone might tell a story, a half-forgotten legend of a brave knight or a sly fox. These tales are not believed in any literal sense. Rather, they are gentle incantations against the darkness. In each telling, there is a kernel of defiance. Life may be harsh, but the mind, at least, remains a quiet kingdom no lord can tax. Before bed, you might murmur a prayer to a saint or to an old spirit whose name has long been lost to official doctrine. Your words are simple, almost embarrassed. Grant me strength for tomorrow. Keep the cow from sickness. Let the frost spare the barley. These petitions drift up into the rafters, merging with the soft creak of timbers and the quiet breathing of those you love. You lie down on straw and old cloths, the smell of earth still clinging to your skin. Outside, an owl calls into the ink-black night, and for a moment you listen, your mind suspended between sleep and waking. The owl's cry is neither threat nor comfort, merely another thread in the endless fabric of this world. And as your eyes finally close, the day collapses inward, its weight dissolving into the hush of your heartbeat. You do not dream of riches or escape. Those are fantasies too fragile to survive the cold mornings. Instead, you might dream of the warmth of the hearth, of a child's hand in yours, of the moment the first green blade of spring pierces the dark soil. These are the true treasures, the quiet pearls strung along the harsh necklace of each year. As dawn arrives once again, you stretch within the cramped walls of your cottage, hearing the bones click and echo in the quiet room. You feel the weight of the night behind you, not the restful slumber modern people might know, but a kind of survival pause, a dim, fragile refuge where your body mends just enough to face another day. The first breath you take is heavy with the mingled sense of smoke, damp straw, and the faint, sour note of old sweat. There is no linen sheet, no down pillow. Instead, your head rests on a bundled cloak or perhaps a small sack of chaff, anything that keeps you from the rough wooden boards beneath. Your eyes drift toward the small window, if you are lucky enough to have one. It is often nothing more than a narrow slit covered with oiled cloth or animal bladder, a translucent membrane that lets in pale light but little warmth. You watch the subtle shift from gray to hesitant blue, the world beyond the walls waking slowly. In that moment, there is a kind of hushed ceremony, a silent pact between you and the cold light, an understanding that this, too, is life. Rising is not a choice, but an obligation. You push yourself upright, aware of the eyes of your children or younger siblings, watching from their bundles nearby. You do not sigh or complain. Every movement is a lesson to them. How to rise without protest, how to fold yesterday's aches into today's chores. Outside, the village is stirring. Thin trails of smoke climb into the sky, crooked and wavering like an old man's fingers. You hear the low calls to cattle, the soft curses as someone tries to coax a stubborn mule from its shelter. Beyond the animal pens, the distant fields await like an endless ocean, unyielding, vast, indifferent. You begin your morning with the animals. You clean their stalls, shovel out the heavy, sour straw, and lay down fresh bedding if there is any to spare. You pat the rough flanks of the cow, feeling her warmth seep briefly into your frozen palms. The henhouse is another stop. A few eggs, perhaps, if luck smiles. Each egg is a small treasure, more precious than any coin in your pocket. The children, still bleary-eyed, are given tasks. They might carry water from the well, a journey that can take an hour or more, each trip a slow test of patience and strength. The buckets sway and splash against their legs, chilling them to the bone, but they walk on. Others gather firewood or scour the hedgerows for kindling. Their hands are red and chapped, but you see in their faces the first hint of resilience, the beginning of the lifelong dance with hardship. Once these first chores are done, the rhythm shifts. You join neighbors in the fields, tools in hand, bodies moving in a silent, shared choreography. The air is filled with the dull thud of hose breaking clods, the gentle rustle of cloth as sleeves are pushed back, the low exchange of observations about the weather or the health of a pig. Words are used sparingly, each one precious, each one weighed before leaving the toe. During these hours, you sense the delicate balance that holds your world together. The village is more than buildings and fences. It is a tapestry of breath, sweat, and silent promises. A glance from a neighbor might mean a warning about a roving band of tax collectors or news of a wolf sighting at the edge of the woods. A subtle shift in a friend's gait could suggest illness, a twist of fate that might ripple through every family nearby. At midday, you gather near the edge of the field or by a hedgerow for a moment's rest. Meals are meager, a crust of dark bread, a slice of onion or cheese if you are fortunate. Some drink a thin ale, others sip water carried in simple wooden flasks. There is no lingering. Each moment spent sitting feels like a stolen jewel, precious, fleeting, dangerous if overindulged. In the shade, someone might tell a quick story, usually about an ancestor who survived a famine or about a saint who protected a lost traveler. These are not stories to entertain so much as to fortify the spirit, to remind each listener that survival is not merely about the body, but also the mind's quiet endurance. You laugh softly at the right moments, even when your stomach growls in protest. When work resumes, the afternoon stretches like a long corridor. Your muscles ache, and your palms wear new blisters atop old calluses. You notice the slow drift of the sun, each step across the sky marking your progress. You know every patch of ground intimately, the stones that catch your blade, the dips that hold unexpected pools of rain, the scent of wild herbs crushed underfoot. Children drift back and forth, delivering messages or carrying small tools. Their voices carry higher, sometimes breaking the heavy air like a bird's startled cry. You watch them, remembering yourself at that age, smaller, wiry, filled with a kind of wild curiosity that the field slowly taught to bend. As evening approaches, there is a subtle quickening. Tools are gathered and checked, blades wiped and hung carefully. The final loads of hay or wood are bundled, and you begin the slow walk homeward. You do not rush, for haste invites accidents. A twisted ankle or a spilled bundle could cost dearly tomorrow. Back in the village, The smell of cooking fires hangs low. You sense, almost before seeing, which houses have enough food tonight and which might make do with broth thin enough to see through. You greet each other with brief nods or murmured blessings, small signals that say, "We are still here. We are still trying." Inside your cottage, the hearth glows dimly. The meal, however simple, is an event. A pot of pottage simmering for hours, maybe thickened with barley or a few foraged greens. You share it carefully, dividing each ladle as though it holds your collective future. Around the fire, faces soften. In this circle of warmth, for a brief moment, the relentless demands of survival loosen their grip. After eating, small tasks continue. Mending a tunic by lamplight, carving a new handle for a hoe, rebraiding a frayed rope. These are not chores to finish, but quiet gestures to ensure tomorrow might start just a little easier. As night deepens, the air shifts again. The last embers glow, their faint warmth seeping into your feet as you listen to the rhythmic breathing of those you love. You think of the next day, of the same motions repeated with minor variations. The endless loop of labor, the quiet triumph of returning alive, unbroken. Before sleep claims you, perhaps you offer a silent thanks, not to a distant, grand deity, but to the simple, immediate spirits of soil and seed, the quiet guardians of your fragile world. You ask for a mild frost, a kind lambing season, the patience to bear the small tragedies that line each path. When at last you lie down, the darkness is complete, thick enough to seem alive. You pull the rough blanket closer, its smell of smoke and field grass wrapping you in a somber kind of comfort. There is no promise of dreams, only the slow drift into a deep, consuming stillness. And so the day ends as it began, in a quiet, unspoken pact between body and earth, between breath and labor. Tomorrow, the rhythm resumes. Same soil, same sun, same relentless hope that somehow, against all odds, you will continue. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of your small plot of land, hands resting on a wooden staff worn smooth by years of use. You gaze across the narrow strips of earth, the same earth your father turned, the same soil that fed your mother and cradled your siblings. This land is your lifeline and your prison, bound as tightly to your bones as the breath in your lungs. But the land is not truly yours. It belongs to a distant figure you might rarely see, the lord of the manor. His name echoes through the village like a distant thunderclap, a presence felt rather than seen. He lives in a fortified hall or a grand manor house beyond the fields, guarded by walls, by men-at-arms, by symbols of power that you can only imagine. At the start of each year, you owe him your dues. Rent must be paid, and it is not measured in neat coins jangling in a purse. Instead, it is paid in the currency of your life. Bushels of grain, fattened pigs, baskets of eggs, skeins of wool. Each item you surrender is a piece of your family's warmth, a portion of your winter store, a whisper of comfort taken away. When the Lord's reeve or steward arrives, you feel a tightening in your chest. His arrival is never loud, but his shadow stretches long. He inspects your storehouse with quiet judgment, noting the sacks of grain, the tanned hides drying on the wall, the few hens scratching in the dust. You nod to his questions, hands clasped behind your back, eyes low. Every gesture is measured, each word chosen with caution. After he leaves, the air feels thinner, as though the small hearth fire has been robbed of its last ember. You watch your family count the remaining stores, each head bowed, each heart heavy with the arithmetic of survival. How much must we eat more carefully? Will the children have enough to grow strong? Can we spare enough to trade for a bit of salt or a small iron tool? Yet the taxes do not stop at rent. There is the tithe, that sacred 1/10 owed to the church. Once again, you part with grain, honey, wool. You do so with a bowed head, reminded that the village priest, with his solemn sermons and incense-filled chapel, speaks not just for the village, but for the heavens above. You walk into the small stone church, its walls cool and damp, the light filtering through narrow stained glass like spilled wine. You kneel on the worn wooden bench, whispering your prayers into the darkness. The priest's voice rolls over you, soft as a distant drumbeat. You pray for your children, for a mild winter, for your soul's safety. When you rise, the burden remains on your shoulders, lighter in spirit perhaps, but heavier in body. In times of war, or when the Lord demands extra levies, you feel the earth tilt beneath your feet. An unexpected tax for repairing the castle wall, a levy to support the king's crusade, a sudden request for more grain to feed the garrison passing through. Each demand is another blow to the fragile balance of your life. You do not argue. You cannot. Resistance is a luxury beyond your reach, a dream you fold into the same place where you hide small joys and unspoken longings. While the Lord dines on roasted game beneath painted manors, you chew a hardened crust beside a dying fire. You might hear rumors about feasts in the hall, venison with rich gravies, spiced wines, platters of fruits brought from distant lands. In these stories, there is a faint shimmer of wonder, a tale told by those who saw a glimpse through the kitchen door or carried a heavy pot into the great hall. At night, these visions swirl around your mind, but you wake before dawn to the same echoing truth. Your back to the plow, your fingers curled around a wooden spoon, stirring thin pottage. Beyond taxes and levies, there is another weight, labor services. Several days each week, you must work on the domain, the Lord's own fields. You rise early, not to tend your own cabbages or mend your own fence, but to join others under the reeve's sharp eye. You might sow barley or reap wheat, clear stones from paths, mend a sheepfold, repair a bridge washed out by spring floods. The labor is heavy and relentless, and the reward is absence, the absence of punishment, the absence of added fines. You watch the sun climb and fall, feeling the sweat soak your tunic, smelling the sour tongue rising from your skin. You see your fellow villagers bent low, each carrying their private litany of worries in silence. When the day ends, you trudge home on legs that feel hollow. The thought of your own plot, now neglected, gnaws at your mind like a slow worm. You know that the weeds creep higher each day, that the stones seem to multiply when left alone. But there is no choice. The obligations to the Lord must be met before your own family's needs can even be considered. In these moments, you might pause and glance at the sky, the only part of your world that feels truly free. You watch the last sliver of sun slip behind a hedgerow, turning the horizon into an amber sea. Perhaps, for a heartbeat, you feel a soft defiance rise, a quiet breath of what if? But you bury it quickly. Dreams of freedom taste sweet and vanish fast, like morning mist on the meadow. The cycle repeats. Taxes in grain, taxes in wool, days of labor under the steward's eye, nights filled with quiet accounting of what remains. You measure each seed before planting, each crumb before eating. Your children learn to count not in numbers, but in handfuls, in spoonfuls, in heartbeats. In rare moments of relief, perhaps after a good harvest or a mild spring, you feel a cautious swell of joy. You might bake a small loaf enriched with honey, or share a piece of cheese by the hearth. But even in these fleeting joys, there is a small echo of fear. How long before the next demand? When will the reeve return? This is not a life of bright victories or heroic conquests. It is a life of narrow margins, of careful steps on a tightrope stretched between hunger and duty. You learn to be watchful, to listen for the hooves of a tax collector's horse or the distant bell of a passing monk. You train your face to remain calm, your hands to move quietly, your spirit to bend without breaking. As you lay down at night, the distant sound of the manor bell might drift on the wind, a dull thrum reminding you of the lords who dine in warmth, the priests who chant in candlelit halls, the kings who wage wars far away. You do not curse them openly. Instead, you let the sound settle into your bones, another weight among many, another echo in the rhythm of survival. And so your world contracts to what you can hold. A handful of barley, a child's small smile. The warmth of a fire, the curve of a sickle, the promise of a dry roof above your head for one more night. This is your dominion. Small, fragile, fiercely guarded. When spring returns, the rhythm of your burdens changes, but never truly lightens. You feel the dampness of the thawed earth beneath your feet, the delicate scent of new growth drifting in the air. Yet with each tender sprout, each patch of green, comes another reminder of your obligations. As soon as the ground softens enough to accept seeds, you set to work, not only for yourself, but also for the Lord's domain. The reeve marks out plots with a long staff, tapping the soil with an authority as old as the stones in the village wall. You kneel, palms dirty, knees damp, eyes narrowed to focus on the fragile promise of each seed. Planting is an act of hope and fear braided together. You bury each kernel as though tucking away a secret, whispering prayers in your mind that the rains will be kind, that late frosts will pass by like a sleeping hound, that hailstones will spare your fragile shoots. The weight of these fears is not yours alone. You see it etched into your neighbors' faces. A mother pauses mid-hoe, her brow furrowed as she watches a thin cloud creep across the sun. An old man leans heavily on a spade, his breath short, his eyes measuring the sky as though it were a ledger. Even the children learn early that each seed sown is a question to the heavens. Will you allow us to live another year? But as you kneel, you are not sowing only for your family's survival. You remember the share that must be set aside for the Lord, the tenth for the priest, the portion to be sold or traded for salt, wool, or iron nails. Before the first blade of barley rises, you already know how much is spoken for. Your portion is the last, the echo, the leftover sigh after all the voices have claimed their due. Beyond taxes and tithes, there are other silent costs. The forest, which you might once have roamed for fallen wood or small game, is no longer yours to take freely. Cutting timber without permission, gathering too many nuts, snaring a rabbit on the Lord's hunting ground, each act can bring a fine or worse. You tread carefully beneath the oaks, eyes darting, ears tuned for the crack of a branch or the snort of a guard's horse. The forest becomes a place of both comfort and tension, a green cathedral that listens to your breath and measures your courage. You collect only enough to fill a small basket, fingers moving quickly, each motion rehearsed from childhood. When you return home with twigs for the hearth, or a few mushrooms tucked in your sleeve, you step softly, hoping the steward does not come sniffing after your small victories. You glance over your shoulder, and in that fleeting glance is all the knowledge of your place in this world. Seen, controlled, never truly free. In moments when duties weigh too heavily, some peasants flee. A whispered rumor passes through the fields. He ran away to the next shire, or she vanished into the forest beyond the river. The idea glimmers for a moment, a tiny spark in the darkness. But running is a gamble as sharp as a reaper's blade. If caught, you might be dragged back in chains, paraded as a warning to others. Your family might pay the price, your home stripped of animals, your fields trampled under soldiers' hooves. Most simply bury the thought and return to the plow. Within the village, there is an unspoken code of endurance. Neighbors help each other mend roofs or lift heavy beams. A loaf of bread might find its way into a sick woman's hands without a word. When illness creeps through the huts, fever in a child's flushed cheeks, a deep cough rattling an old man's chest, help is offered quietly, wrapped in rags or whispered prayers. Yet each kindness is shadowed by necessity. You give what you can spare, because you might need the same mercy in return. Each bowl of pottage shared, each handful of grain lent, is both an act of compassion and a silent investment in survival. Children learn the weight of burdens early. At 5 or 6, they guard geese in the meadows, gather nettles for pottage, scare away crows from precious seedlings. Their hands grow calloused before they can even write their names, if they ever learn to at all. A girl might learn to spin wool while her mother tells stories by the fire, stories of saints, of long-lost kings, of the Virgin's mercy. But each tale is woven with warnings. Obey the steward, keep your eyes down, never take what is not given. Boys follow fathers to the fields, carrying small wooden rakes or water jugs, learning the shape of toil as naturally as breathing. They imitate the older men's bowed shoulders, their cautious glances, their resigned sighs when a storm bruises the sky. On feast days, when the church bells toll in joyful rhythm, you catch a glimpse of another life. The village gathers outside the church after Mass. Children darting between legs, women exchanging gossip, men discussing weather and tithes in low voices. There might be a simple game, a shared jug of ale, a small pastry baked from hoarded honey. For a brief moment, laughter flutters over the fields like startled birds. But even in celebration, you measure joy carefully. A broken leg during a playful scuffle might mean disaster. A spilled jug of ale is a small tragedy. You smile, but always with a watchful corner in your mind. The burdens do not leave, they simply step aside for an afternoon, waiting to reclaim their place at sundown. As the day wanes, you return home with a heart slightly lifted, pockets perhaps a little emptier, cheeks pink from laughter and ale. You step over the threshold into your hut, into the smell of smoke and warm wool, into the embrace of your daily reality. Tomorrow, you will rise before the first bird cries, slip into the same tunic patched and repatched, and move once more between your fields and the Lord's. You will nod to the reeve, bow to the priest, soothe the cough of your child, mend the fence that leans dangerously after last night's wind. And so the village breathes, each peasant an organ in its silent, slow-beating heart. The burdens weigh heavily, but are carried not with shouting or fists, but with quiet persistence, like a stone worn smooth by the river's patient hands. You sleep lightly, one ear always attuned to the creak of a hinge, the bark of a distant dog, the whisper of rain on thatched roofs. In your dreams, you might walk beyond the village, cross unseen borders, stand on a shore you've never seen. But come morning, you rise and place your feet exactly where they must be, on the cold earth, ready to continue the endless, silent struggle that binds your life. Beyond the constant shadow of taxes and labor dues, another burden shapes the medieval peasant's existence, the unspoken debt of loyalty and obedience. This debt is not written on parchment or tallied with ink, but is felt in each heartbeat, each lowered gaze, each careful footstep across the manor fields. Imagine your neighbor, a man you have known since childhood. Perhaps he once teased you in the meadows, or shared an apple beneath an oak tree. Now he stands beside you during corvée labor, his back as bent as yours, his hands raw and split from the scythe. But one morning, you learn he has been summoned to the Lord's hall. Whispers spread before sunrise. He took extra grain, or perhaps he spoke too freely at the tavern, or maybe he was simply too slow to yield a portion of his harvest. No one asks directly. No one dares. You avert your eyes when you see his wife weeping into her apron. You keep your head bowed when the steward rides past, the man's face a blank mask, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. Afterward, the man might return to the village, thinner, quieter, his spirit chipped away like a weathered stone. Or he might not return at all. In either case, his absence becomes another echo in your mind, a cautionary tale carried silently from hearth to hearth. The manor's legal system is a net woven tight. It is not the impartial law you might imagine today. Rather, it is a tapestry of customs, oaths, and expectations that always tilts in favor of those above you. You might find yourself called to the manor court over a stray pig, a disputed boundary stone, or a missing chicken. As you stand before the steward, the air in the hall feels heavy. The walls, adorned with simple banners, seem to press inwards. You speak softly, if at all. You cannot read the parchment the clerk holds, nor can you match wits with the steward's practiced tongue. The sentence, whether a fine or extra labor, is accepted with bowed head and clenched hands. In the village, disputes among peasants are often resolved through negotiation, quiet compromise, or whispered apologies over a shared loaf. But when the Lord's authority intervenes, mercy is a rare visitor. The punishment is not only about restitution, but also about reinforcing hierarchy, a reminder that you are watched, weighed, and kept in place. Beyond the hall, another invisible burden hovers, the threat of famine. Unlike the distant threat of war or royal politics, famine is an intimate guest, one you sense in each dry wind, each cloud that refuses to break, each night your stomach pinches tighter. A summer without rain means your barley grows stunted, the cabbages turn bitter, and the orchard drops its fruit prematurely. A winter that bites early might freeze your stored vegetables, leaving nothing but shriveled carrots and dry peas. Even a mild disease among sheep or oxen can spiral quickly. A dead animal means lost wool, lost meat, lost manure for fertilizing fields. As the days shorten and the nights deepen, you ration each crumb with meticulous care. You watch your children's cheeks hollow, their eyes turn watchful and still. You see your spouse kneeling by the hearth, stirring thin pottage, eyes tracing the wooden spoon as though it might yield miracles. In these times, community bonds tighten. A neighbor might slip a turnip into your basket, or leave a small sack of oats at your door. You return the kindness however you can, a patch of mended cloth, a repaired tool, a few eggs when your hen surprises you with an early clutch. These exchanges are not recorded, yet they form a ledger more sacred than any tax roll. It is this invisible network of shared suffering and quiet generosity that keeps the village breathing, when the Lord's stores are locked tight and the merchants turn away their wagons. Yet even kindness carries its shadows. When survival teeters at the edge, suspicion grows like mold in a damp cellar. Did that family take more than their share of gleanings after harvest? Did someone slip into the orchard at night? You hear low arguments in the lanes, see the sideways glances at market day. Trust, once frayed, is slow to mend. Religion, too, weaves deeply into this fabric of burdens. You hear the priest's sermons on humility, patience, and the virtue of suffering. He reminds you that your labor on earth is a passage to the heavenly fields beyond, that your hunger will be sated in paradise. Inside the stone church, you kneel on cold flagstones, hands pressed together, words tumbling from your lips like small stones dropped into deep water. Candles flicker, casting shadows on saints carved into the walls, solemn, unblinking witnesses to your silent prayers. The incense curls upward, carrying your whispered fears into the rafters, out into the sky. But even here, you must pay your due, the tithe. You watch as your hard-won grain passes into the church's granary. As the priest's table gleams with offerings you could scarcely dream of keeping for yourself. Yet, amid the ache, there is also comfort. The festivals, the shared chants, the feast days, and processions stitch your lives together into something that resembles meaning. When the traveling friar visits, stories of distant lands and relics arrive with him. He brings rumors of miracles in far-off towns, of relics that heal the sick and statues that weep real tears. You listen with wide eyes, imagining a world beyond your fields, beyond your hut's low doorway. In the evenings, these stories become sparks that light the dark corners of your mind. And still the rhythm returns, sowing, tending, reaping, storing, paying, bending. Each day bleeds into the next like ink on rough parchment. You measure time by the turn of the plow, the lengthening of the days, the creak of your joints as seasons shift. Yet through it all, a quiet dignity pulses beneath the layers of submission and survival. It is not a loud or defiant dignity. It is the stubborn persistence of a seed pushing through frost, of a hen laying her egg amid cold draughts, of a mother's soft lullaby whispered over a cradle woven from reeds. You hold on to small tokens, a carved wooden comb, a ribbon once bright and now faded, a smooth stone your child found and pressed into your palm. These objects, meaningless to the reeve or the priest, hold your history in their worn surfaces. At night, when the fire's glow fades to embers and the wind sighs against the walls, you might dream of what lies beyond the manor boundaries, the great roads leading to cities you will never see, the ships that cross misty seas, the courts where kings argue over crowns and borders. But in the morning, the dream drifts away with the morning fog, leaving you to reach for your hoe or your spindle, to greet another day in the quiet contest between earth and hunger. In this silent struggle, you are both prisoner and poet, caught in a life so narrow it seems suffocating, yet so intricate it holds entire worlds in each seed and each breath. The burdens weigh on your shoulders, yes, but they also bind you to a long, unbroken chain of souls who have walked these same furrows, whispered these same prayers, and faced the same pale dawn with weary but resolute eyes. When you think of a medieval peasant, you might imagine a figure stooped in a field, hands caked in mud, shoulders hunched beneath an endless sky. Yet the deeper truth is even more delicate, more complex. Life beneath the manor as rule isn't merely a question of bread and labor. It is a web of promises, expectations, and subtle fears that shape each sunrise and each dream. Consider the annual boon work, special days when peasants were required to perform extra tasks for their lord beyond their regular obligations. Perhaps it's mending hedgerows to keep deer out of the lord's private hunting grounds, or gathering rushes for the manor hall's floors. On these days, the village moves as one, a silent current flowing from each hut, each hearth, toward the lord's estate. Men swing sickles in unison, women bundle sheaves into rough cords, children scuttle at their heels, gathering stray stalks. Conversations stay low, punctuated by the occasional bark of a steward or the distant whinny of a horse. No one speaks of defiance aloud. Each hand that tightens on a scythe or tugs a weed understands the delicate line they walk. Work too slowly, and you draw the steward's glare. Work too quickly, and you finish early, only to be given yet more to do. At dusk, you return home with muscles aching like old hinges, skin carrying the scent of crushed leaves and sweat. Yet, in the hush of twilight, you feel a private relief. Another day survived, another debt to the earth, and the Lord paid. Meanwhile, beyond these tangible tasks, there are less obvious taxes, those measured in loyalty, silence, and self-denial. When the Lord hosts a feast, the village must supply eggs, game, fish, or a share of honey. During visiting seasons, extra hands are conscripted to prepare the great hall or to stand watch at the gate. Your very identity, your name, your stories, your hopes, is pressed into the mold of the manor's expectations. Even your children inherit these invisible chains, their lives mapped out by custom and obligation long before they first open their eyes to the flicker of a rushlight. Marriage, for example, is not merely a matter of love or companionship, but a delicate negotiation of alliances and dues. You must pay a merchant, a fee to the Lord for the right to marry off a daughter. It is said to compensate the manor for the potential loss of her labor. Imagine the quiet anguish of a father who has hoarded every coin, every grain, only to see it slip away in exchange for a daughter's chance at her own hearth. This payment is not merely a financial strain. It is a symbolic act that echoes in the hushed farewells and tear-stained partings. The daughter walks away beneath a veil of woven flax, her feet leaving small crescents in the dust, while behind her, her family stands motionless, each member wrestling with a bittersweet pride and loss. Festivals and holy days punctuate this fabric of burdens with moments of color and shared breath. On these rare days, the entire village transforms. Rough tunics are patched and washed, faded ribbons find new life in plaited hair, and wooden cups are filled with cider that glows like late summer sunsets. The church bell calls you to the green. There, musicians coax melodies from crude fiddles and pipes. Children chase each other between stalls where honey cakes and roasted nuts are sold, and old men swap tales of past harvests and past lords. For a few hours, the hierarchy feels blurred. The steward might smile, the reeve might share a drink, and the priest's voice softens as he blesses the gathered crowd. Yet even in laughter, an undercurrent persists. The knowledge that tomorrow will pull each person back to their rows, their spindles, their hidden debts. In the quiet hours before dawn, the burdens return in a chorus of small anxieties. The roof leaks where last winter's storms tore away thatch. The sow might not survive her litter. The miller accused you of withholding grain and now demands extra payment. Even as you wrap your arms around your sleeping child, the arithmetic of survival hums at the edge of your thoughts. Some nights, if you dare lift your gaze beyond the hedge that frames your yard, you might glimpse distant torches winding toward the horizon, a caravan of merchants or a lord's retinue moving to a distant holding. In that brief glow, your mind might wander to other lives, the tapestry merchants who speak of foreign dyes and silks, the monks who study illuminated texts, the soldiers who march into battles you will only hear about in church sermons or through wandering minstrels. These glimpses offer both escape and torment. You ache with a quiet yearning for freedom, for the unknown beyond your familiar lanes. Yet you remain bound by promises written in neither ink nor blood, but etched into every field ridge, every roughened hand. If ever you try to speak of these hidden desires, a dream of travel or a yearning for learning, your words drift into the air like mist. Friends might nod politely, then return to discussing the piglet's weight or the brewing of ale. Your wife might sigh and remind you of the debts still unpaid. The children stare wide-eyed, half believing you might vanish at dawn, striding down the road after a phantom horizon. But when the fire burns low and shadows flicker against wattle walls, you allow yourself to remember, to imagine. And for a moment, despite the heavy tapestry of obligations, your soul stirs like a bird testing its wings at the edge of a darkened wood. There is also the burden of judgment, not just from lords or reeves, but from each other. In a small village, reputation is currency as valuable as grain. A sharp word spoken in frustration can echo for seasons. A borrowed tool not returned on time becomes a stain on your name. An unpaid debt to a neighbor, no matter how small, weaves whispers around your family like brambles. Thus, you live carefully, each interaction a negotiation of goodwill and subtle debts. A gift of bread today might be repaid with help in mending a fence next month. A shared bucket of ale at the festival becomes a quiet assurance that, should illness strike your household, your fields might still be sown. Through all this, your existence resembles a long, unbroken chant, low, rhythmic, carrying forward without pause. You rise, you labor, you yield. You pay in coin, in grain, in silence, and in your own quiet dreams. And yet, inside this web of burdens, there is a kind of fragile sanctuary, the knowledge that your ancestors endured, that you endure, and that perhaps your children will too. The dawn creeps into your hut, soft as a cat's paw, painting the ceiling beams gold and gray. You inhale the cold morning air, the scent of damp earth and last night's ashes. Another day waits, heavy with tasks and small, flickering hopes. You draw in breath, gather your tools, and step out into a world that knows your name, not as a lord or a knight, but as a quiet keeper of life, simplest, most persistent promise, to continue. Imagine the hush before dawn, when the mist rolls over the meadows like a thick, slow breath. A peasant stands at the threshold of his hut, listening not to the clamor of a city or the orders of a commander, but to the whispers of the earth itself, the distant bleat of a goat, the quiet creak of timber settling, the first tentative calls of crows overhead. In this world, the line between the sacred and the mundane is almost invisible. Every furrow turned in the field is a prayer, every harvested turnip an offering. Faith in medieval peasant life is less a series of grand cathedral rituals and more an undercurrent flowing through each act, each decision. You do not question why you cross yourself before milking the cow, or why you leave a small piece of bread on the windowsill for wandering spirits. These gestures are as natural as breathing. They are the quiet bridges between survival and something higher, something that promises meaning beyond toil. On holy days, the entire rhythm of the village changes. The bell in the distant stone tower echoes across the fields like a heartbeat. Children awaken to the smell of baking bread and brewing ale, their excitement humming through the thatched rooftops. Women wrap their hair with ribbons, once hidden in chests for such special occasions, while men wash away the week's sweat and pull on their best, if still patched, tunics. Walking to the church on these mornings feels almost ceremonial. The path that yesterday carried mud and sorrow today feels like a narrow road to a higher plane. The villagers gather in small groups, each carrying baskets of eggs, small wheels of cheese, or handfuls of barley as offerings. The elderly lean on gnarled sticks, their faces folded into maps of sun, wind, and unspoken fears. Inside the stone church, the air shimmers with the scent of candles and the resinous sweetness of incense. The priest stands as both shepherd and gatekeeper, his words a lifeline thrown across the chasm of everyday hardship. You listen not merely for salvation, but for reminders that your labor is not in vain, that suffering here might earn peace elsewhere. Latin phrases roll over you like a tide, mysterious, distant, yet comforting in their cadence. For many peasants, the church is more than a place of worship. It is a rare sanctuary from the demands of the manor and the relentless grind of the fields. It is a place where hierarchies blur, if only briefly. The steward kneels beside the blacksmith. The miller mutters prayers beside the weaver's daughter. In these shared silences, there is a fragile democracy of spirit. When the service ends, the day unfolds into communal celebration. Simple games spark laughter. Children chase hoops across the green. Young men challenge each other to wrestling matches. And old women share secret smiles over small flasks of honeyed liquor. A traveling juggler might toss wooden clubs into the pale sky, drawing gasps from wide-eyed boys who, tomorrow, will return to chasing crows from the barley. Food on these days is both symbol and salvation. Instead of the thin pottage that defines most meals, you taste roasted meats, perhaps a chicken sacrificed for the occasion or a rabbit trapped with silent patience. Flatbreads emerge from shared ovens, smelling of warmth and fleeting abundance. Jars of ale are passed hand to hand, and for a moment, each sip tastes like defiance against the constancy of hunger. Yet beneath the laughter and song, shadows linger. You see them in the glance of a widow whose harvest failed, in the stiffness of an elder who fears another harsh winter. Joy, in this world, is often brief and fiercely defended, like a candle's flame in a drafty hall. The festivals also serve as subtle negotiations of love and destiny. During midsummer dances, eyes meet across the bonfire's glow, tentative steps weaving new stories into the village tapestry. Promises are whispered under starlight, bracelets exchanged, small tokens buried beneath oak roots as quiet pledges. Yet even these tender moments carry the weight of obligation, alliances between families, hints of dowries yet to be saved, and the ever-looming permission of the Lord. After the final embers die, when children sleep on straw-stuffed mats and adults rest their tired feet, a different kind of quiet descends. The air feels fuller, as though all the laughter and longing still hover above the rooftops. In these hours, a peasant might sit by the doorway, cradling a wooden cup, staring at the moon. Memories of lost children, of siblings taken by famine or plague, drift through the mind like wayward sparks. The warmth of the festival lingers, but the return to reality has already begun its slow, inevitable march. Beyond the festivals, faith threads itself into daily life in countless small ways. You whisper charms against the evil eye before stepping into the field. A twig arranged above the doorway wards off unseen forces. Even the arrangement of stones around the hearth speaks to generations of learned caution, each placed not only for heat, but for unseen blessings. And then there are the stories, tales of saints who healed the sick, of angels who carried lost souls beyond the forest's edge, of devils who slipped into barns to spoil the milk. These narratives live not in books, but in the gentle hush of winter nights when the wind scours the walls and the fire crackles like distant footsteps. Parents speak them into their children's ears as talismans against despair, weaving moral lessons into the soft lull of sleep. On moonless nights, when wolves howl from the tree line and every creak in the beams seems to echo with menace, faith becomes a soft shield. You draw it around yourself like a threadbare cloak, not strong enough to stop the rain or ease an aching tooth, but enough to guide your next breath, your next small act of kindness, your next morning's courage. Faith is not always a matter of shining miracles. More often, it is a quiet endurance, the belief that sowing seeds might lead to harvest despite hailstorms, that lighting a candle might keep spirits at bay, that each small gesture of decency ripples outward into something larger. It is, in its own humble way, an art of survival, as essential as bread or water. Through this tapestry of shared rituals and fragile joys, a medieval peasant's life pulses in rhythms few today could imagine. They live not only with hardship, but with an unspoken poetry, a willingness to dance on muddy ground, to carve tiny blessings from harsh hours, and to believe in unseen guardians who might perhaps watch over a crumbling thatched roof. As dawn begins to claim the sky, staining it with cautious rose and amber, these reflections fold themselves into the gentle waking of the village. A rooster calls, echoing through the misty fields. Doors creak open, footsteps mark the earth, and life, quiet, stubborn, and unexpectedly luminous, begins again. Beyond the rhythm of festivals and the glow of holy candles lies another essential layer of peasant existence, the quiet, often unseen relationships that bind neighbor to neighbor, family to family, soul to soil. These connections form a hidden lattice, a social scaffolding as crucial as the beams that hold up a thatched roof. Picture the moment when a neighbor's cow calves in the night and voices stir across the hamlet. Lamps flicker to life, rough hands reach for shawls and cloaks. Women hurry through dew-wet grass to lend their warmth and calm words. Men murmur about luck and the signs of the season. Even in a life marked by personal struggle, the success or tragedy of one household ripples through all others. The bonds are tested in times of famine. When the last stores of dried beans and salted fish run thin, villagers share small handfuls of grain or dried herbs. Quiet exchanges carried out at doorways in the dim half-light of dawn. A mother might slip a piece of flatbread to a neighbor's child, her own hunger an afterthought. An elder might trade stories or simple charms in exchange for a bowl of broth. In these unremarked gestures, you glimpse a moral economy beyond coin and tithe, a community ledger measured in compassion and memory rather than ledgers or scales. Yet this fragile web can fray as quickly as it forms. A careless accusation of witchcraft, a dispute over borrowed land, or rumors of hoarded grain can fracture ties that took generations to weave. Even the smallest acts of betrayal become heavy stones, carried in silence through fields and church aisles. Forgiveness, when it comes, is slow, like winter thawing into spring mud. Inside these intimate circles, knowledge flows quietly. There is no library to consult, no parchment-bound manuscripts to illuminate the world. Instead, wisdom passes hand to hand like a shared loaf. A grandmother shows her granddaughter how to steep yarrow to staunch a wound. A father teaches his son the subtle signs of coming rain in the bending of barley heads. Knowledge is alive, whispered over fence posts, sung softly at the cradle, woven into daily repetition. And there is lore not meant for priests or lords, the private vocabulary of hedgerows and hearths. You learn which plants ward off spirits, which root teas help a sickly child sleep. You learn to read the language of crows and foxes, to sense omens in the flight of a lone heron at twilight. These are not superstitions to the peasant mind, but necessary instruments of survival, small shields against an unpredictable world. Think of a woman stooping at dawn to sprinkle ashes around her doorway, muttering a chant older than the stones. A man tracing protective crosses on his tools before harvest. These motions exist alongside official faith, interlacing sanctioned rituals with private magic. Together, they form a living tapestry of belief, not always logical, but deeply comforting, as constant as the wheel of stars above. Seasonal cycles mark the passage of time more sharply than any calendar. The turning of the plow each spring feels like an exhalation after a long, tight winter. Budding hedgerows and the first tender shoots of wheat bring cautious smiles to weather-creased faces. In midsummer, bonfires crown the fields with orange halos, the air thick with songs to chase away illness and misfortune. Autumn arrives with a different music, the rasp of sickles, the thud of stacked sheaves, the sigh of wind curling through bare orchards. Each golden heap of grain represents survival, the promise of another year. Yet with every sheaf bound, another worry rises. Will there be enough? Will the rats slip into the granaries? Will early frost claim the late turnips? Winter, then, becomes a time of inwardness. Days shorten into long, dark evenings beside the hearth. Children crowd near the flames, tracing patterns in the soot, listening to ghost stories or tales of ancestors who wrestled bears, outwitted devils, or turned a single sack of grain into a winter's feast through cunning and luck. Women mend tunics and twist new rushes for the floor, humming low songs whose words have long blurred into lullabies. This cold season tests the mettle of every soul. Illness spreads easily through tight quarters. A cough in December can echo as a funeral bell in January. Here again, faith takes on its quiet armor. Each cough met with a whispered blessing, each lost life mourned with candles lit in icy churches, each empty place at the table honored with small offerings of bread or milk. In these moments, you see most clearly the fragile line between resilience and surrender. The peasants' bodies, bent from toil, harbor a deeper toughness, a stubborn ember that refuses to die even when the body weakens. They endure for each other as much as for themselves. A mother stokes the last embers in the hearth, not only for warmth, but as a silent promise to her children that dawn will come. On rare evenings, even in the depth of hardship, music finds a way in. A fiddle's sigh, a drum's steady heartbeat, a shepherd's pipe threading through the darkness like a silver thread. Music lifts hearts beyond the reach of debts, lords, and winter's cold breath. Couples may slip into small dances, the floor creaking beneath hesitant steps, while neighbors clap softly, each beat echoing as a shared defiance against life's relentless gray. Feasts, though rare and humble, also knit the community closer. A slaughtered pig becomes a village-wide event. Neighbors gather to salt cuts, render fat, and prepare sausages spiced with handfuls of foraged herbs. As the night deepens, scraps of meat roast over coals, their scent rising like a benediction. Children drift off mid-laughter, cheeks sticky with broth, dreams filled with more warmth than they have known for months. And beneath every laughter and toast, there lies the sober knowledge that joy is always temporary. Tomorrow brings fresh tolls, the same unyielding earth, the same watchful eye of the reeve. But tonight, under stars that glimmer like scattered embers, there is room to imagine a gentler world, a fleeting sanctuary of shared breath and simple abundance. In these pauses, A peasant might remember a mother's blessing long gone, or the shape of a father's hand guiding a young plow. Memory is another form of wealth here, a treasure no steward can tax, no famine can claim. It is held in the creases of the face, the calluses of the palm, a hush before the next hymn. As the embers fade and the hush deepens, sleep claims the village in a soft, relentless wave. Snores and sighs mingle with the faint crackle of dying fires. Dreams wander across frost-bitten fields, through sunlit glades of memory, touching on fears and small triumphs alike. When morning comes, they will awaken to the same hard roads, the same gone chorus of chores and debts. Yet in that sleep, if only for a few hours, they are unburdened travelers moving beneath a kind sky. And so the wheel turns again, each day a bead on a long, patient rosary of labor, faith, and small, defiant joys. Tomorrow will demand the same, and they will answer, quietly, resolutely, with hands steady and hearts still dreaming beneath patched blankets. When we step even deeper into the labyrinth of a medieval peasant's faith, we find that beyond the church walls and beyond whispered charms, there exists a third sanctuary, the natural world itself. To them, each forest edge, each stone circle, each river bend carries its own spirit and memory. Nature is not a separate domain. It is an intimate companion, sometimes gentle, sometimes merciless, but always present. A peasant walking into the woods to gather firewood does not enter as a conqueror. Every tree is a silent elder, every mossy stump a possible dwelling for unseen watchers. A sudden rustle in the leaves is enough to send a prayer tumbling from the lips, not out of superstition alone, but out of a deep, habitual respect. The forest, in its dark embrace, holds both threat and protection. Its shadows are thick with the past. Ancestors who hunted boar with crude spears, lost children who vanished into the fog, and ancient rites performed long before parchment and crown claimed dominion. In the meadow, bees drift between wildflowers, weaving invisible patterns that hint at mysteries older than any written text. A peasant pauses to watch, perhaps remembering an elder's words. As long as bees dance, the world breathes. Such sayings become anchors, small truths in a sea of uncertainty. Rain is not merely water. It is an omen, a mood, a conversation between heaven and earth. A drizzle might be seen as a grandmother's blessing, gentle and necessary. A relentless storm, however, may whisper of debts unpaid or secrets unconfessed. The peasant's mind is trained to read these signals the way a scribe reads letters. Clouds tell stories, wind carries gossip, frost sketches warnings on window panes. During certain seasons, rituals spill beyond church walls and into the fields. At planting time, seeds are dropped into furrows accompanied by murmured hopes for growth, for protection against sudden blight or swarming locusts. Children might scatter flower petals at the field's edge, laughter rising like startled larks. These acts are not performances, but quiet affirmations that even in an unpredictable universe, intention matters. In summer, the longest day of the year carries a special weight. Fires are lit atop hills, their orange tongues licking at the twilight. Circles form around these pyres, songs blend with the crackling flames, hands clasp, and eyes seek constellations above, as though looking for reassurance that someone is listening. Even those who rarely speak of devotion find themselves drawn to these moments, carried by a communal pulse stronger than the harshest winter. Autumn brings a different cadence, one of measured gratitude and cautious accounting. Each basket of apples, each row of dried beans, each salted haunch represents another chapter in the village's collective survival story. Harvest festivals are both a final exhale and a plea for mercy. Mercy from early snows, mercy from fevers that stalk close quarters. Lanterns flicker on fence posts, casting shaky halos that transform humble yards into small sanctuaries of light. At the heart of these gatherings often stands the storyteller, not always an elder, Sometimes a young woman with a sharp memory, or a shepherd who has wandered more valleys than most. Their tales braid history, legend, and soft warnings. A fox that outwitted a cruel lord, a maiden who transformed into a swan rather than marry against her heart, a ghostly knight forever searching for his lost love among moonlit hedges. The listeners sit wrapped in cloaks or straw mats, breaths held at each pause. In these stories, they hear themselves reflected, their fears, their defiance, their small triumphs. Beyond the circle of light, dogs curl into themselves, chickens settle into a collective sigh, and the stars drift slowly, indifferently above. In those moments, time seems to loosen its grip, and the peasant glimpses an echo of eternity, however brief. Not all acts of faith or community unfold in groups. There are solitary rituals, private and hidden from even the closest kin. A mother might place a sprig of rosemary under her childless mattress to keep away night terrors. A father might carve symbols into the handle of his scythe before harvest, each notch a prayer for a safe season. Such actions, small and tender, remind us that faith for the peasant is not about grandeur or spectacle. It is about presence, about the quiet conviction that each day's labor is seen and perhaps blessed. There are also silences too heavy to break. A woman who loses an infant may bury a small charm in the garden, hoping to nourish new life from sorrow. A man who returns from the forest without game might sit alone by the fire, tracing calloused fingers over a prayer bead, worn smooth from countless anxious mornings. They carry these private devotions like hidden rivers, running beneath the surface of daily tasks. In these private worlds, death is a companion rather than a distant terror. Life expectancy is brief. Disease and accident are uninvited guests. And yet, the medieval peasant rarely curses this fate aloud. Instead, they weave it into their worldview. Funerals are not only farewells, but gentle acknowledgments that the earth receives what it lent. A grave is dug by neighbors, the body washed and dressed by trembling hands, flowers laid over the eyes to guide the spirit into whatever dawn awaits beyond the horizon. Children learn early to respect these rites. They watch as adults lower small bundles into the ground, eyes wide and bright with the newness of mortality. They whisper among themselves that if you listen closely, you might hear the spirit's last sigh slip into the sky with the rising lark. Such moments shape them more deeply than any lesson in the fields. And so, faith is not a fortress. It is not armor. It is a cloak, patched and frayed, but warm enough to face another frost. It does not promise rescue. It promises accompaniment. In the silence before the rooster calls, in the hush beneath the stars, faith breathes alongside the peasant, steady, imperfect, and wholly human. Through all these layers, festival fires, shared loaves, secret charms, moonlit burials, we begin to understand that for the medieval peasant, faith is not confined to pews or dictated solely by dogma. It is everywhere, in the rustle of hay, in the taste of rain on the tongue, in the brittle laugh echoing through a narrow alley on a foggy dawn. It is a daily, repetitive act of saying yes. Yes to the next seed planted, yes to the next prayer whispered, yes to the uncertain sunrise. Even when that yes trembles, it persists. As the final sparks of the night's fire glow in the hearth, we see this faith settle into each breath. A peasant adjusts the rushes on the floor, checks the latch on the door, strokes the forehead of a sleeping child. Each motion is an amen, quiet and unwavering. Outside, the wind bends the barley like a field of supplicants, bowing before an unseen altar. A peasant does not expect the world to be just or kind, but within this acceptance lies a profound, almost luminous strength. In each scratch of the hoe, in each thread pulled through homespun linen, in each sigh surrendered to the night, there is a resilient grace. It does not shine like a knight's armor, nor echo like a priest's sermon, but it endures, quietly, as constant as the moon's pull on the tides. As dawn slowly unravels its pale light across the thatched rooftops, the rhythm of the village stirs again. The peasant's faith, that quiet, steady flame, is now woven into each mundane gesture of the morning. A kettle set over embers, the soft crunch of dried herbs being crumbled into a pot, the first cautious sip of a thin broth. These are not grand ceremonies, but small affirmations that life, however fragile, insists on continuing. The communal well becomes a quiet confessional at daybreak. Women draw water in heavy wooden buckets, exchanging short, hushed greetings, careful not to wake the still dreaming air. It is here, beneath the shadow of a leaning oak, or beside the moss-laced stone wall, that grief sometimes leaks out between words. A shared glance can carry volumes. A neighbor's fever worsening, a calf lost in the night, the dread of a poor harvest. Yet, after these confessions, they each take up their buckets again, hands steady, heads bent toward the next duty. These moments are punctuated by small joys, the ones that pass almost unnoticed to those on the outside. A mother finds a hen has laid 2 eggs instead of 1. A child discovers an early violet blooming in the ditch. An old man glimpses a shooting star and whispers a wish no one else will ever know. Each tiny blessing is carefully tucked into the day's pocket, a counterweight to its many burdens. Then come the market days, perhaps the closest thing to a festival in the peasantess' regular cycle. Once a month, or at certain crossroads of the season, the village path becomes a temporary artery of chatter, barter, and color. Peasants from surrounding hamlets gather with baskets of turnips, small wheels of hard cheese, pots of honey so dark it almost appears black. Even if coins do not change hands, gossip does. News of distant wars, rumors of the Lord's new taxes, tales of a wandering peddler who claims to have seen cities beyond imagining. A young girl, cheeks pink from excitement, might press her nose against a cloth vendor's stall, marveling at dyed linens far beyond her family's means. A boy tugs at his mother's sleeve, eyes fixed on a wooden whistle carved to resemble a bird. And amidst this swirl of movement, old friends clasp each other's hands in greeting, as if they had crossed oceans to meet rather than mere fields. In these gatherings, laughter surfaces more easily. Faces soften, backs straighten under the shared illusion that for a few hours at least, the weight of obligation can be set down. Songs might be exchanged, simple reels echoing through the stalls, mingling with the smell of roasting onions or spiced cider. The elders might watch from the side, hands folded, nodding slowly as if measuring the balance between joy and prudence. Yet beneath this flickering brightness, a careful watchfulness persists. One must be wary of pickpockets, sudden quarrels, or the subtle eyes of the tax collector drifting through the crowd like a gray hawk. Even during laughter, there is a quiet undercurrent of calculation. What must be traded? How much can be spared? Which secret to keep for another day? In the quiet that follows market day, the peasant returns to the fields or hearth, carrying back not just the traded goods, but the warmth of brief connection. In the hush of twilight, they might replace snatches of conversation or hold tight to the sound of a stranger's song that somehow felt like a blessing. Beyond markets and harvest rituals, the yearly calendar holds deeper ceremonies, tied to cycles older than any church bell. At midwinter, a festival of candles flickers against the deep velvet dark, a collective defiance against the cold's long teeth. Offerings of bread shaped like suns are placed on windowsills, humble shields against the creeping gloom. Families gather closer, sharing sparse meals, speaking softly so as not to disturb whatever spirits slip between shadows. Spring brings its own fragile hope. Buds appear as if by quiet miracle. The first lambs stumble uncertainly through dewy grass, and the peasant's heart lifts in cautious gratitude. With each step, they feel the softened ground underfoot, a gentle reminder that even the hardest frost cannot hold forever. There is singing again, though often under breath, as if to avoid tempting fate. Old songs that have no known authors, just inherited echoes stitched across generations. Some households mark the season by crafting simple charms, woven straw figures hung above doors, herbs tied in small bundles to ward off fevers. These tokens carry no guarantee, but they offer the mind something to hold in the dark hours. They are whispered proofs that though the world may be harsh, humans can still weave strands of beauty and belief through its fabric. The peasant's relationship to the divine remains a mosaic of contradictions, a mixture of trembling awe, practical bargaining, and an almost childlike longing for signs. A sudden rainbow, a particularly fat trout wriggling in a stream, a new foal born strong and quick, all become messages, affirmations that perhaps someone somewhere listens. In the evenings, before sleep claims their weary limbs, they might glance at a small wooden cross, a carved charm, or a tiny figurine placed on a hearth shelf. They murmur a word of thanks or apology, often both. And beyond all these communal and private rituals lies the deep, solitary faith held only in the marrow, that despite all evidence to the contrary, life remains worth the tending. That each seed pushed into cold earth might rise, that each child's laughter is worth the risk of grief, that each dawn might surprise them with some small mercy. Through this daily choreography of faith and festival, joy and sorrow, the medieval peasant fashions a life that is not merely endured, in its own quiet way, cherished. It is a life that asks for no monument, no grand chronicle in gilded script. Instead, it leaves its record in worn paths across meadows, in the smoke curling from a thatched chimney at dusk, in the faint echo of a song rising from a distant field. In those final moments before the day folds into night, one might imagine a peasant standing at their doorway, looking out across the starlit yard, a simple figure silhouetted against the sky, so wide it seems to swallow sound. Perhaps they trace a circle over their heart, or whisper a word to an absent loved one. Perhaps they simply breathe, feeling the stillness pool around them like a gentle tide. Inside, the last embers settle into a soft glow. The room hums with the rhythm of sleeping bodies, the quiet murmur of breath, the slight creak of wood, adjusting to the night's chill. Each heartbeat is an offering, each sigh a kind of hymn. And thus, through centuries long vanished, across winters forgotten and summers reclaimed, the medieval peasant's faith endures, not in grand cathedrals or royal decrees, but in the smallest, most unguarded moments. In the steady hands that knead dough before dawn, in the careful patching of a child's cloak, in the quiet embrace of twilight fields where the moon's silver fingers brush the barley. Faith here is not a fortress. It is a fragile lantern, flickering but unextinguished, cradled between rough palms as the wind gathers in the eaves. And though its light may be small, it is enough to guide them through one more frost, one more harvest, one more night under the turning stars. Imagine a tapestry stretched across the walls of time, its threads coarse, dyed with earth and sweat, yet somehow shimmering under the faintest glow of a hearth fire. This tapestry is not embroidered with knights or queens, nor does it display dragons or mythical beasts. Instead, it reveals the quiet, persistent weave of peasant kinship, the uncelebrated but indestructible fabric of medieval life. In the village, each individual life is a single thread, fragile alone, yet strong when knotted with others. From the moment a child is born, they are not truly seen as an isolated being, but as an extension of lineage, a living testament to past generations and a hopeful echo toward the future. The newborn's first cries are not met with extravagant fanfare, but with hushed prayers, practical preparations, and cautious joy. A grandmother might tie a small charm of woven straw to the baby's wrist, a silent invocation against unseen misfortune. The family hut, though small and humble, becomes a universe unto itself, a nucleus of survival and memory. There is rarely such a thing as personal space. Each breath is shared, each sigh overheard, each moment folded into the collective. In the dim half-light of early morning, parents and children stir together on straw pallets, the air thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and faint traces of herbs. It is here, in this close warmth, that the first lessons of kinship are absorbed. To share without question, to yield a portion of one's bread without expectation, to listen even when words falter. Outside, beyond the mud-streaked door, community life pulses like a steady heartbeat. Fields are tilled not by lone hands, but by neighbors moving in rough harmony, their backs arched under the same sun. When the blacksmith's wife falls ill, a neighbor brings a pot of thin leek soup. When a child stumbles and breaks a limb, a distant cousin offers a worn linen bandage, carefully saved for years. These gestures, small and almost invisible, are the true currency of peasant existence. Underneath these acts of solidarity lies a subtle, often unspoken social contract. No scroll records it, no herald proclaims it, yet it binds as firmly as iron. To refuse help or to hold oneself aloof is to risk slow exile, not by force, but through a quiet fading from the collective memory. In a world where famine, disease, and war hover constantly at the threshold, isolation is a sharper blade than any sword. Elders in the village function as living archives. Their voices, gravelly from decades of wood smoke and winter winds, pass down not just stories, but codes of conduct, silent signals, cautionary fables. Around the evening hearth, children lean forward to hear of ancestors who once braved a river flood to save livestock, or of a woman who carried 2 infants across frozen fields when the thatch roof collapsed. These tales, half fact and half legend, are not meant merely to entertain. They are woven warnings, quiet encouragements to maintain the web of trust and duty. Among these elders, there are few outward symbols of status. A fur-lined hood might mark a wealthier peasant. A particularly fine spindle might suggest a deft weaver. But beyond such modest distinctions, identity rests, not in material adornment, but in the silent tally of deeds. Who has given most during a harsh winter? Who has stood firm when wolves prowled near the sheep pens? Who has whispered comfort to the dying? These deeds become an invisible cloak, woven by the hands of the community itself. Marriage, when it comes, is less a private romance and more a reaffirmation of social ties. Betrothals are arranged with an eye towards strengthening village resilience rather than hearts alone. Yet within this framework, true tenderness sometimes blooms. A shy glance across a shared plow, the quiet passing of an apple beneath a festival table, a hand briefly brushing another in the darkened corner of a barn dance. These moments, fleeting as moths in candlelight, carry a sweetness that transcends grand declarations. With union comes the promise of children, not merely as heirs to a meager plot of barley, but as new fibers added to the community weave. Each child is a potential helper, a future keeper of the family name, a pair of strong arms for the harvest, or a singing voice to lift weary spirits during long threshing days. Infancy is a precarious season, and each milestone, first steps on packed earth, first words echoing in smoky rafters, feels almost miraculous. Loss is a common visitor, yet even in grief, the village closes ranks, wrapping the bereaved in practical comfort rather than hollow words. The festival days punctuate this rhythm of communal labor and loss. On the eve of midsummer, bonfires crackle in the central clearing, throwing silhouettes against the indigo sky. Old songs emerge, some of them so ancient that their meanings are lost to memory, kept alive only by melody and repetition. Young people leap over embers and act believed to chase away ill luck, while elders watch with a mixture of fondness and caution. Here, for one short night, the burden seemed to lift. Faces glow not only from the firelight, but from the rare permission to laugh freely, to imagine for a moment a world beyond debts and duties. A girl might dance with the butcher's son, her bare feet leaving delicate prints in the ash. A father might pass a jug of sour ale to his rival in the fields, and for a heartbeat, the old quarrels dissolve. But even as the embers fade, the morning reclaims its dominion. By sunrise, festival garlands hang limp over doorways, and the smell of charred logs gives way to the sour tang of unwashed tunics and yesterday's porridge. The children, exhausted but exhilarated, drag themselves to help gather eggs or herd goats, the echo of drums still ghosting in their ears. Through these cycles of toil and brief revelry, of collective care and inevitable solitude, the medieval peasant's sense of legacy emerges. Legacy here is not cast in stone or inked onto grand genealogies. Rather, it breathes in the quiet moments, a mother's hands showing her daughter how to mend a tear with even stitches, a grandfather teaching a boy how to judge when the barley is ready to cut, a neighbor passing down a warm charm said to guard against lightning. In these unseen exchanges, the true inheritance is carried forward, not just survival skills, but ways of seeing the world, ways of carrying sorrow without letting it devour joy entirely. Every generation learns anew how to measure hope against hardship, how to weigh silence against song, how to sense in each dawn both a threat and a promise. At the edge of the village, where the fields give way to thickets and marsh, stands an ancient oak, gnarled and hollowed by centuries of storms. Children believe it holds secrets, that if you press your ear to its bark at twilight, you can hear the voices of all who have come before. Of course, it is just wind, just the whisper of dry leaves. And yet, each peasant who stands there, even the most skeptical, feels an unexplainable shiver, as if touched by something older than memory. This is how legacy lives on among those who own nothing but their own breath, not in records or riches, but in gestures, in whispered prayers, in the steady, unremarkable heartbeat of community. A young man sharpening a scythe under moonlight thinks of his father's rough laugh. A woman braiding her hair at dawn recalls the grandmother who first taught her the pattern. Each action is a stitch in a tapestry no historian will display, but which nonetheless holds the village together more surely than any lord's decree. Thus, the peasant's life unfolds, not as a single heroic narrative, but as a series of overlapping ripples, soft, continuous, and quietly resilient. In the end, each peasant is both a witness and a weaver, both a keeper of embers and a spark, waiting to ignite the next generation, small fire in the dark. As the seasons turn, each shift of light and temperature gently reminds the peasant that nothing is truly static. The village itself seems to breathe in cycles, inhaling the new green of spring, exhaling the brittle gold of autumn. Children, once mere shadows at their mother's skirts, now run with sturdy legs across furrows, their laughter floating like migrating birds above the plowed fields. But even as these children grow into new roles, the quiet weight of legacy hovers over them like morning mist. Each childish path is shaped less by dreams than by necessity, an inheritance not of lands or titles, but of rhythms and expectations. A son might learn to read the language of cloud shapes to guess at the next day's weather. A daughter might memorize the subtle shifts in a sick goat's bleat, her knowledge becoming a private archive of signs and portents. Underneath the scudding sky, these lessons unfold in silence. There are no formal schools, no parchment diplomas waiting at the end of the row of cabbages. Instead, the learning is a soft layering, like frost forming on a window pane. It happens while mending nets by moonlight, while gathering herbs along the marsh banks, while watching a neighbor's careful hands bind a sheaf of rye. Over time, these repetitions carve deeper than any written text, etching an unspoken code into marrow and breath. Marriage for these young peasants is not the culmination of a love story as sung by bards in distant halls. Rather, it is a pivot point in the collective survival script. A union means the joining of fields, the sharing of tools, the promise of more hands to sow and harvest. Yet in this unadorned contract, a different kind of tenderness can still take root, one that thrives not on stolen glances, but on shared aches and the quiet satisfaction of enduring another long winter side by side. On certain evenings, as the hearth embers glow low and the wind prowls at the door, one might find a husband gently rubbing a salve onto his wife's cracked hands, or a wife adjusting the straw pallet so her husband's bad knee is cushioned against the night's damp chill. These are not grand gestures. They are small offerings, but they hold the entire architecture of devotion within them. Meanwhile, elders watch, sometimes smiling softly at these humble signs of affection, sometimes murmuring warnings. They carry memories of times when disease swept entire families away in the span of a few moon cycles, when soldiers trampled the barley fields under boot and hooves, when a sudden fire consumed not just a barn, but generations of stored seed and hope. Their advice is often delivered in fragments. A proverb here, a cautionary tale there, each one a small stone added to the foundation of collective memory. In this shared consciousness, personal grief becomes communal grief, and any small joy ripples outward. When a child survives a harsh fever, the whole village seems to exhale at once. When an old man finally succumbs to the weight of years, the mourning is not contained to a single household. Women bring bread and cabbage soup. Men mend fences or carry water for the bereaved. The loss is folded into the village's fabric, not as a tear to be mended, but as a stitch in the larger pattern of belonging. At the same time, there is an awareness that each life is temporary, a flicker in the long line of ancestors and future unborn kin. This knowledge does not always bring sorrow. Often, it breeds a certain humility, a kind of patient acceptance. To be a peasant is to live close to the soil in every sense, to understand that even the strongest oak must eventually bow to lightning, that even the best harvested grain might fail in a single wet season. During long evenings, when the fields are quiet and the moon hangs low, a few villagers might gather outside, watching sparks rise from a small fire. They speak little, content to listen to the soft clatter of beetles, the distant hoot of an owl. It is here, in this hush, that one senses the invisible threads most keenly, the ones binding each soul to another, each breath to the cold, star-salted air. And then there are the midwives, silent custodians of both life's first cries and its final breaths. They slip between doorways at odd hours, arriving without fanfare, but with a practiced calm that soothes even the most panicked mother or ailing elder. The midwife carries knowledge that has no written name, the precise pressure of a hand on a laboring belly, the way to whisper softly so that a departing soul might find its way with less fear. Their presence is a reminder that each life begins and ends in a circle of clasped hands, hushed prayers, and the ever-turning wheel of breath. To a peasant child, the midwife appears as a figure of quiet magic, someone who knows when to boil willow bark for fevers, who can tie knots in red thread to keep away spirits, who always seems to arrive just before a crisis unfolds fully. Over time, the child might learn that this magic is not supernatural, but built on decades of watching, listening, and remembering. And yet, even knowing this, the sense of awe remains. In old age, when bones become brittle as last year's straw, the peasant finds solace not in gold or property, but in the knowledge of continuity. Sitting by the doorway, a grandmother might trace the shape of a younger hand on her knee, watching as a grandchild races past with a squeal. Her mind might drift to her own mother's humming, to a father's laugh, carried on a cold wind, to the shape of a brother's back as he walked away into a distant forest, never to return. This mental tapestry is rich and heavy, sometimes unbearably so, but it is also a source of strength. Even as joints ache and eyes cloud, there remains the subtle comfort of knowing that the world she shaped, even if only by teaching a child to spin flax or how to comfort a frightened lamb, will ripple beyond her final breath. As night descends and smoke rises in fragile ribbons, one can almost sense the entire village breathing in unison. A chorus of small sounds, the creak of a cartwheel left outside, the low murmur of a father telling a bedtime fable, the occasional bark of a restless dog becomes a lullaby of survival. Each note is fleeting, yet together they form a song that has no composer and no end. Legacy for the peasant is thus not a monument erected in stone or an inscription carved on a shield. It is something softer, deeper, and perhaps more enduring. A recipe whispered between generations, a fragment of a song hummed during milking, a prayer mumbled into the folds of a wool cloak on a stormy morning. It is a network of kindnesses, cautions, and shared silences, passed onward like a torch whose light is humble yet tenacious. This is the unseen tapestry that stretches beneath fields and huts, beyond the reach of chroniclers and kings. It is woven from every sacrifice and every small act of mercy. And it endures not because it is celebrated, but precisely because it is not. Like the roots of a great tree, it holds firm and silent, nourishing life above even when unseen. In these threads, the medieval peasant finds both their burden and their grace, an inheritance that binds and steadies, that confines and frees. And when the last breath is drawn, it is these quiet connections, rather than any possession, that remain as proof of a life fully, if humbly, lived. When the first frosts descend on the village, they arrive not as an unexpected guest, but as a familiar, if unwelcome, companion. The peasants have spent months stacking firewood, mending the thatch, salting the last of the fish, and turning the final root vegetables into pickled reserves. Each task carries with it the echo of generations. Every blistered palm, a quiet testament to ancestors who once stood in the same wind, felt the same sting of icy breath. During winter, the community transforms from an outward-looking web of fields and meadows to an inward-turning constellation of flickering hearths. The fields vanish beneath a white shroud, and paths that were once busy veins of life become silent, muffled corridors of snow. Yet inside the huts, life persists with a tenacity that belies the bleakness outside. Children huddle near the fire, their faces rosy from the warmth, eyes wide, as elders weave stories, not only of saints or distant kings, but of local legends. A fox who outwitted a cruel landlord, a girl who planted a single seed that bloomed even during the harshest winter. These tales are not simply amusements. They serve as lanterns in the darkness, offering shapes to the unknown and courage to the small, fragile hearts who will one day inherit these same hardships. Food becomes both a ritual and a quiet anxiety. Thin broths stretch as far as possible, every crust of bread savored, every turnip shared in portions measured as carefully as coin. The rhythm of meals is slower, more contemplative. The scrape of a wooden spoon against an empty bowl resonates like a distant bell, a reminder that survival is a communal negotiation. Sometimes an unexpected gift arrives. A neighbor drops off a handful of dried apples, a precious gift from last year's harvest, or a bit of lard traded from a passing merchant. These small acts carry a warmth that no fire can replicate. In these long nights, the relationships between villagers deepen and complicate. Arguments from harvest time may resurface, simmering in the confined air. A husband might brood over a brother's slight remark. A wife may remember a neighbor's harsh word about her daughter's loom work. Yet even amid the simmering tensions, the bonds hold. For in these small, close rooms, no one can truly retreat into solitude. Each grievance must be folded into the larger necessity of coexistence. When illness inevitably arrives, a cough that turns ragged, a fever that refuses to break, it is met not with resignation, but with a resigned kind of action. The midwife arrives with her worn satchel, containing herbs that smell of earth and smoke, charms woven from red thread, and a voice practiced in both comfort and command. The entire household shifts into a quiet vigil, children pressed against each other for warmth and courage, parents listening to each slow, labored breath. The village collectively senses each illness. A flickering candle left in a window, a door slightly ajar, an absent figure from the communal well. These small signals ripple outward. And so, without formal summons, help arrives. A pot of barley gruel left on a doorstep, a neighbor offering to feed the chickens, a child running errands across the icy paths. In the medieval peasant's world, there is no abstract notion of privacy. Life is so intertwined that individual suffering inevitably becomes a communal ache. Beyond the huts, the winter landscape offers its own harsh lessons. Snowdrifts gather against low fences, cattle huddle in cramped shelters, and the trees creak under the weight of ice. Some mornings, villagers awaken to find a sheep lost to the cold or a barn roof sagging dangerously. Each small disaster is absorbed into the communal narrative, another thread in the long tapestry of perseverance. Yet, amid this stark season, there are moments of almost startling beauty. A morning when the sun catches on frost crystals, turning the drab field edges into a glittering sea. A sudden chorus of ravens lifting from a bare oak, their black shapes scribbling urgent messages against a pale sky. A moment when the first lamb of the year totters forward on impossibly thin legs, bringing a hush of reverence even to the most hardened elders. There is also music, though not the refined melodies of courtly lutes or harps. Instead, there are low chants, rhythmic and repetitive, echoing through the huts during long evenings. Sometimes it is a weaving song, a pattern of sounds that matches the steady pull and push of thread. Other times, it is a lament for lost kin, or a soft, lilting tune to soothe restless children. These songs serve as vessels for memory and emotion, carrying sorrow and hope like water in a clay jar. In the midst of winter's grasp, some villagers whisper of spring, as if invoking a fragile promise. They imagine the thaw, the return of green to the hedgerows, the first bees bumbling drunkenly among the wildflowers. This forward-looking gaze is not naivety, but necessity. It is a strategy, a way to hold fast when the present feels unendurable. Even the elders, bent and stooped, catch themselves peering toward the horizon, listening for a bird call that marks the end of this long, white dominion. And so, in this intimate, enclosed season, the peasant's sense of legacy grows quietly deeper. Not because of grand revelations or heroic acts, but through the cumulative weight of small, steadfast choices. To share the last crust rather than hoard it, to mend rather than discard, to comfort rather than condemn. The children watch and learn, internalizing these lessons with a gravity beyond their years. In their play, they mimic adults not with wooden swords or crowns, but with small wooden bowls, pretend chores, tiny gardens scratched into the frozen dirt outside. Eventually, when the first meltwater trickles along the paths, a slow exhale passes through the village. The huts open cautiously, faces peer out, and tentative steps press into the soft, yielding mud. Life stirs again, but it is not the abrupt joy of sudden freedom. It is a slow, hesitant reacquaintance with color and sound. New tasks await, mending fences flattened by snow, coaxing seeds into uncertain soil, tending animals weakened by the long confinement. The fragile beginnings of spring mirror the peasants themselves, weary, perhaps, but unbroken. The elders remind the young of past springs that came too early, or frost that returned cruelly in May. They speak not to quash hope, but to temper it, to teach the delicate art of balancing expectation with caution. This quiet vigilance, this patient readiness for either blessing or betrayal from the land, becomes part of the inheritance passed down from each bent back and furrowed brow. And so, each year, the circle turns. Winter's intimacy folds into spring's tentative promise, which yields to summer's relentless demands, then to autumn's sober harvest. With each revolution, the invisible threads binding the community grow both more complex and more resilient. In these seasons, the medieval peasant finds a kind of hard-won grace. It is not the grace of saints depicted in illuminated manuscripts, nor the chivalric honor of knights. It is the grace of continuity, of waking each day and choosing, again and again, to remain woven into the communal fabric despite hardship, despite loss, despite the constant whisper of mortality in the cold night air. Here in these cycles and silences, the true measure of a peasant's legacy reveals itself. Not in the fleeting glow of youth or in moments of triumph, but in the quiet, repeated gestures of care, gestures so subtle that they almost disappear into the background hum of life. And yet, without them, the entire tapestry would unravel. When summer finally takes hold, it arrives not as a jubilant festival, but as a relentless drumbeat of duty. The days lengthen until sleep feels like a stolen luxury. The air hums with insects, the dust rises beneath every footstep, and the sweat from a single hour's labor can soak through layers of rough-spun linen. Yet beneath the ceaseless toil, there is a quiet undercurrent of relief. The earth, at last, is giving again. Each dawn begins with the familiar chorus of roosters and the heavy clatter of wooden doors thrown open. Fields come alive under a pale morning sun, shadows stretching across furrowed earth. Men and women bend low to weed, hoe, and coax each fragile green shoot into a promise of sustenance. Children are set to watch over gooseberry patches or drive crows from millet fields, their shouts echoing faintly across the meadows. The communal tasks are endless and precise. Hay must be cut and gathered before a sudden summer rain ruins it. Rye and barley must be tied into sheaves and carefully stacked to dry. The rhythm of these chores becomes a second heartbeat, pulsing beneath every conversation and shared glance. There is little room for hesitation. Nature waits for no one. Yet even in these sweat-soaked days, there are pauses, moments of gentle humanity folded into the labor. A grandmother might slip a berry into a child's hand while no one is watching. Its sweetness, a silent reminder that life offers small gifts even amid hardship. A young woman might hum softly as she braids onion tops for storage, her voice carrying over the field like a half-forgotten lullaby. These small gestures, almost invisible, form the true fabric of the peasant's summer, a hidden tapestry of kindness that persists despite exhaustion. In the evenings, after long hours in the fields, the villagers gather for communal meals under open skies. Bread, cheese, porridge, simple fare that tastes richer when shared at the end of a day's struggle. The fading light gilds faces lined by sun and wind, and for a moment, even the harshest life softens at the edges. Someone might pull out a small reed pipe or drum, and melodies meander into the dusk, threading laughter and soft sighs together beneath the first stars. Through these shared moments, deeper bonds are forged. There are no formal declarations of alliance or loyalty, only the silent agreement that each soul depends on the others. A neighbor helps mend a fence not for payment, but because tomorrow the wind might tear down his own. A mother nurses a friend's feverish child as her own. Trust is not a currency here. It is the very ground beneath their feet. But summer is not without its shadows. Drought can strike suddenly, turning young corn to brittle husks. Hail may come in a single punishing afternoon, flattening entire hopes in an hour. Disease hovers at the edges, borne on warm winds or carried by visiting traders. And beneath every setback lies a collective understanding. Misfortune is never personal. It is a shared adversary. During these moments of loss, the peasant community becomes a living testament to resilience. Rather than turning away, neighbors move closer. A roof lost to hail brings an outpouring of straw and spare labor. A failing crop becomes a reason to divide portions of stored grain more carefully. In the face of scarcity, generosity emerges not as charity, but as survival's quiet sibling. As harvest approaches, anticipation tightens like a drawn bowstring. Every eye watches the sky, every ear listens for thunder's distant growl. When the first grains fall into woven baskets, relief mingles with reverence. Each kernel embodies months of worry, whispered prayers, and the unspoken promise that one might see another winter. Reaping is not merely a task. It is an act of collective faith, a declaration that they have, once again, coaxed life from an often reluctant earth. In the evenings during harvest, fires burn longer. Shadows of men and women move slowly in the flickering glow, their shoulders slumped, their hands stained with chaff. Yet amid the fatigue, there is a fragile, almost sacred exultation. Even as backs ache and skin blisters, there is pride. Another year's sustenance secured, another thread in the long braid of survival tied. When the final cart returns laden with grain and the last bundles of flax are set to dry, a hush settles over the fields, a hush so profound that it almost resembles contentment. The tools are stowed away, the animals fed extra scraps in gratitude for their summer labors. And in that fleeting pause, the villagers might dare to look beyond today, to imagine next spring, next summer, next generation. In these cycles, we see the true legacy of medieval peasant life. It is not measured in hoarded silver or fortress walls, but in the gentle arc of a mother's hand over a child's brow, the silent glance exchanged over a shared loaf of bread, the careful tending of a wounded lamb. It is the inheritance of unrecorded courage, passed quietly from calloused palm to soft, untried fingers. Children, watching from field edges or listening at hearths, absorb these unspoken lessons. They learn to read the sky as scripture, to hear the soil's subtle complaints as an elder's wisdom. They learn that each hardship is both an enemy and a teacher, each moment of ease a small but precious victory. And so, as the summer wanes into autumn, the fields transform once more. Stalks stand golden and brittle, leaves drift earthward in small, contemplative spirals. The sun softens, taking on the long, gentle slant that signals the coming of frost. The peasant community begins its careful, almost ceremonial descent into winter's embrace. Roots are stored, barrels sealed, fibers spun into thick, comforting cloth. There is an almost sacred tenderness in these preparations, a final lullaby before the long hush of snow. In this final turning, each villager carries within them the season's sum, the laughter shared in fleeting sunlit hours, the sorrows, pressed like seeds into hidden corners of the heart, the daily proof that survival is less about grand gestures than about countless small acts of endurance and compassion. Here, beneath the silent sweep of migrating geese and the first silver gleam of frost on the fields, the peasant finds not triumph, but a quiet kind of transcendence. They do not write chronicles or commission statues. Their stories live instead in the echo of their footsteps across dew-laden meadows, in the rhythm of the loom, in the fragile warmth of shared soup on a cold morning. This is their true monument, a life threaded invisibly through the centuries, an offering to a future they will never see, but trust will come. In the end, the peasant's world is not defined by conquest or proclamation, but by a patient weaving together of earth, community, and time. A tapestry unseen by kings, unrecorded by scribes, yet more enduring than any crown or fortress wall. It is here, in these quiet cyclical sacrifices and shared breaths beneath low thatched roofs, that we glimpse the most uncelebrated yet profound legacy of medieval life. As the final autumn leaves drift past narrow wooden doorways and gather in soft piles against stone walls, there is a moment of stillness, so complete that it feels like the land itself is holding its breath. The medieval peasant stands at the threshold of another winter, the long, slow hush of frost, creeping across fields once vibrant with labor. For the first time in many months, the rush of sowing and reaping has eased, and there is space, however fleeting, to look inward. Imagine yourself standing there beside them, beneath the low glow of a pale sunrise, your breath visible in small silver clouds. Around you, cottages lean together as if for warmth, their thatched roofs darkened by rain and time. Chickens mutter softly in nearby coops. A lone sheep shifts in the pen, nudging at dry hay. Inside, the hearth crackles, the single heartbeat of every home through the cold months to come. In this suspended season, life contracts. Days shorten, shadows grow long and gentle, and human movement slows into deliberate gestures. The stirring of porridge, the mending of torn sleeves, the rhythmic weaving of wool. A quiet descends, not of despair, but of cautious reverence. This is not a pause born of choice. It is a surrender to the cyclical embrace of the earth itself. To modern eyes, these moments might seem unbearably hard, colored only by deprivation and constant threat. But for the peasant, winter is also a time of subtle gifts, shared warmth, storytelling, the gentle creation of small joys against the backdrop of endless gray. When labor recedes, words step forward. Stories blossom in the dark corners of cottages, whispered as embers glow and sparks drift upward like small vanishing stars. There are tales of saints and miracles, of trickster foxes outwitting hunters, of ancestors who rose before the first crow of the rooster to outsmart frost and famine alike. Children listen with wide, unblinking eyes, each tale weaving new threads into their mental tapestry of the world. Evenings stretch long into night, punctuated by the quiet clink of wooden cups and the soft laughter that can only come when there is nothing more to be demanded of the day. Among these stories live countless small prayers for warmth, for the safe return of spring, for the steady hands of neighbors in times of sickness. These hopes are not etched into marble or recorded on scrolls. They move silently from lip to lip, heart to heart, generation to generation. This unrecorded lineage is perhaps the most profound inheritance the peasant passes down. Not gold, nor titles, nor lands marked on royal maps, but a quiet code of endurance, of finding meaning in shared struggle and tender mercies. The knowledge that a loaf of bread, broken into feeds, not just bodies, but souls. That a blanket offered on the coldest night can warm a lineage as surely as it warms a single shivering back. The modern world, with its bright lights and unending noise, rarely allows us to hear these echoes. But if you listen closely, you might still catch them in the hush before dawn, or in the sudden stillness of a winter morning. A reminder that beyond our towering cities and illuminated screens, there lies an older rhythm. The slow, patient music of the seasons, of lives bent low to the soil, yet never truly broken by it. In this final reflection, the medieval peasant emerges not as a shadowy figure crushed by fate, but as a quiet architect of survival and subtle grace. The soil was both enemy and ally, the sky both punishing judge and generous benefactor. And through this constant dance of hardship and hope, they cultivated not just fields, but a deep-rooted strength, an ability to see the sacred in the ordinary, the miraculous in the mundane. Their lives remind us that resilience is rarely loud. It is a gentle thing, carried in the hollow of cupped hands, in a shared sip of thin broth, in the unwavering glance across a frozen yard that says, "We are still here. We endure." It is the kind of resilience that does not demand statues or songs, but rather continues quietly, shaping each generation like the wind shapes a hillside. As you drift back from these imagined hearths, from the smoky warmth and the soft murmur of old songs, you may feel a sudden reverence for the everyday. The simple act of lighting a candle, the familiar scent of baking bread, the comfort of a blanket drawn over your shoulders on a cold night. These small acts, so easily taken for granted today, were once triumphs hard won, each representing 1,000 quiet victories over hunger, cold, and time itself. In contemplating their world, we do not merely look backward. We look inward. We recognize that beneath layers of progress and invention, we still carry fragments of that same fragile humanity. The ache for belonging, the gratitude for warmth, the yearning for stories that bind us to one another. Even now, we stand on their shoulders, moving forward on paths first carved by hands we will never touch, guided by instincts honed beneath medieval moons. And so, as our journey through the peasant's life draws to a close, allow yourself to rest in that thought. Let the stories drift like embers through your mind, warming the spaces within you that long for simplicity, for connection, for the quiet courage of those who knew no other life, yet lived it with a depth we are only just beginning to understand. Tonight, as you slip beneath your blankets and listen to the hush beyond your window, remember the echo of that ancient hearth, the low murmur of voices carrying through time, across fields once sown by unknown hands. Feel the weight of that shared human thread and carry it gently, like a single seed tucked into your palm. A reminder that no matter how far we travel from the soil, we are always in some secret way its children. Sleep well, traveler of time. Let the rhythm of old earth and forgotten fields cradle you tonight. And when dawn comes, may you rise with the same quiet tenacity that once lit the fire in a peasant heart, beneath the low sky and the watchful moon.